Stoicism. Stoicism is not just an ancient philosophy, it is a way of seeing the world that strips life down to its raw truth. At its core, Stoicism teaches that we cannot control what happens to us, but we can always control how we respond. This idea is both liberating and terrifying. Imagine watching your plans crumble, your expectations dissolve, and realizing that the external world is beyond your command. Most people collapse under that realization, but the Stoic does not. The Stoic understands that true power lies in mastering the mind, in choosing calm when others choose chaos, in choosing reason when others are swept away by rage. Marcus Aurelius, the Emperor of Rome, wrote his private reflections not as a ruler, but as a man wrestling with his own soul. He reminded himself daily that people would lie, insult, and betray him, yet he could remain unmoved because their actions did not touch his inner fortress. Epictetus, born a slave, insisted that chains could never enslave his mind, because freedom is not the absence of bondage, but the presence of self-discipline. Seneca, amidst wealth and politics, reminded himself that death was not an enemy, but a teacher, whispering to cherish every fleeting moment. To live stoically is to look at pain, loss, and uncertainty and say, "You do not define me." It is to wake each day and understand that life is not guaranteed, that fortune is fragile, and that control is an illusion. Yet within that acceptance, a fire burns, the fire of resilience, courage, and an unshakable serenity that no storm can touch. Epicureanism. Epicureanism is often misunderstood as the pursuit of reckless pleasure, but in truth, it is one of the most profound paths to peace ever conceived. At its heart lies a simple yet radical idea. The purpose of life is to seek pleasure, but not the fleeting kind found in indulgence and excess. True pleasure, Epicurus taught, is found in the absence of pain, in the quiet contentment of a calm mind, in the joy of friendship, and in the serenity of simplicity. Imagine a world where people chase wealth, power, and recognition, only to end up restless and afraid of losing what they have gained. Epicurus looked at this endless hunger and declared it a trap. He said, "The gods are not watching us, and death is not to be feared. For when we are alive, death is nothing, and when death arrives, we are nothing." This shattered the chains of fear that enslaved humanity for centuries. By dissolving the terror of divine punishment and the dread of the grave, Epicureanism freed the soul to live fully in the present. Epicurus himself lived in a garden, away from the noise of politics and ambition, surrounded by friends, teaching that bread, water, and companionship were enough to create happiness. He believed that once you silence unnecessary desires, the craving for endless wealth, power, and immortality, you discover that life's sweetest pleasures are already within your grasp. Epicureanism whispers that peace is not in grasping for more, but in learning to need less. It is the art of savoring existence, stripping away illusions, and resting in the quiet ecstasy of a life that is finally enough. Cynicism. Cynicism is a philosophy born not of bitterness, but of radical freedom. It teaches that the path to happiness is found by rejecting the artificial chains of society, wealth, status, possessions, and even reputation, and returning to a life lived in harmony with nature. The cynic sees the world as a stage full of actors trapped in roles they never chose, clinging to masks of respectability and ambition. To the cynic, all of this is illusion. The only true life is one stripped bare of false needs, where the soul can breathe without the suffocation of convention. Diogenes of Sinope, the most infamous cynic, embodied this philosophy with brutal honesty. He lived in a barrel, owned almost nothing, and mocked the powerful without fear. When Alexander the Great stood before him and asked what gift he desired, Diogenes replied, "Stand out of my sunlight." In that single act, he shattered the illusion of power, proving that no king could offer him more than the freedom he already possessed. His life was not a rejection of pleasure, but of dependency. He sought joy in simplicity, strength in self-sufficiency, and virtue in unmasking the pretenses of society. To live as a cynic is to refuse the prisons others willingly build for themselves. It is to laugh at greed, ambition, and vanity, knowing they are cages disguised as treasures. Cynicism does not beg for acceptance. It exposes hypocrisy, strips life to its essentials, and finds contentment in what cannot be taken away. It is a philosophy of raw defiance, a flame that burns away illusions until only truth and freedom remain. Platonism. Platonism is the philosophy that insists reality is deeper than what our eyes can see. It whispers that the world we touch and grasp is only a shadow, a dim reflection of something far greater, the eternal realm of forms. To Plato, the objects of our senses are fleeting and imperfect, but behind them exists a higher truth, pure and unchanging, a world where beauty, justice, and goodness exist in their most perfect form. The material world is like a cave, and humanity are prisoners staring at shadows on the wall, mistaking illusions for reality. The philosopher, however, dares to turn around, to walk toward the blinding light, to step outside and behold truth itself. This journey out of the cave is not easy. It is painful, it is disorienting, it demands that one abandon the comfort of appearances. Yet once the mind has seen the light, it cannot return to ignorance without a sense of loss. Platonism calls us to rise above the noise of daily life, to seek the eternal over the temporary, to remember that true fulfillment is found not in wealth, not in power, but in the soul's alignment with what is timeless and pure. Plato believed love itself was a ladder, a force that begins with attraction to physical beauty, but ascends toward the love of wisdom, the love of truth, the love of the divine. To embrace Platonism is to live with the conviction that life is more than survival, more than pleasure, more than fleeting desire. It is to see the world as a mirror, reflecting imperfectly the radiant perfection that lies beyond. Aristotelianism. Aristotelianism is the philosophy of grounding, a call to see the world not as shadows or illusions, but as it truly is, in all its living detail. Aristotle believed that truth is not hidden in some distant realm, but woven directly into the fabric of nature, logic, and human experience. He studied everything, the stars above, the plants beneath our feet, the patterns of speech, the laws of politics, the nature of virtue, because he saw reality as knowable, structured, and purposeful. Where his teacher Plato looked to the heavens for perfection, Aristotle looked to the earth, declaring that wisdom begins with careful observation of the world before our eyes. At the center of Aristotelian thought is the pursuit of eudaimonia, often translated as flourishing or living well. Life's purpose, he taught, is not mere survival or fleeting pleasure, but the cultivation of virtue through balance. Courage, for example, is not reckless boldness or cowardly retreat, but the golden mean between the two extremes. Justice, temperance, wisdom, all are paths of moderation that harmonize the human soul. To Aristotle, happiness was not a gift of fortune, but the reward of a life lived with discipline, reason, and moral clarity. He believed that everything in existence has a purpose, an inner drive to fulfill its potential. An acorn longs to become an oak, just as a human being longs to become fully human, rational, ethical, and complete. Aristotelianism demands we ask ourselves daily, are we living in alignment with our nature? Are we becoming who we were meant to be? Are we shaping our lives into works of virtue? It is a philosophy of growth, of steady becoming, and of anchoring truth in the living world. Skepticism. Skepticism is the philosophy that dares to question the very ground on which certainty stands. It begins with a haunting realization: how much of what we claim to know is truly secure, and how much is illusion, assumption, or borrowed belief. The skeptics looked at dogma, superstition, and even philosophy itself, and asked, how can we be so sure? Their method was not destruction for its own sake, but liberation from the chains of false certainty, from the arrogance of rigid truth, from the anxiety of clinging to what may crumble tomorrow. Pyrrho of Elis, often called the father of skepticism, taught that the world is unknowable in its essence. For every claim, there exists a counterclaim of equal weight. For every truth, an opposing truth. To demand certainty is to demand what the human mind can never possess. But within this uncertainty lies an unexpected gift: tranquility. When you release the desperate need to know with absolute conviction, you free yourself from endless argument, from fear of being wrong, from the torment of defending unstable ground. The skeptic walks through life with an open hand, not a clenched fist. They live in a state of suspension, a calm acceptance that reality may always exceed human grasp. This suspension, what the Greeks called epoche, is not despair but serenity, for it releases the burden of impossible knowledge. Skepticism is not a void, but a quiet refuge, a recognition that the mind can rest in uncertainty, that peace blooms when the obsession with certainty fades. It is the courage to live without final answers, yet still to live fully. Neoplatonism. Neoplatonism is the philosophy of ascent, a vision of reality that pulls the soul upward toward the ultimate source of all existence, the One. It teaches that beneath the chaos of the material world lies a hierarchy of being, flowing like light from a single divine source. The One is beyond thought, beyond description, beyond form itself. From this ineffable unity emanates the realm of intellect, where pure ideas and truths dwell, and from intellect flows the soul, which animates the cosmos and connects humanity to the divine order. For Plotinus, the great architect of Neoplatonism, the human soul is not bound to the dirt of this world. It is a fragment of something eternal, and its true destiny is to turn inward and ascend back toward the source from which it came. Every desire we feel, every longing for beauty, every hunger for meaning is not random. It is the soul's memory of its higher home, calling us back to the One. The journey is not about renouncing life, but about peeling away illusions and remembering that we are more than flesh, more than circumstance, more than the noise of earthly desires. Neoplatonism invites us to see the world as a vast chain of light, where everything that exists is connected, descending and ascending in degrees of being. To live within this philosophy is to feel awe, to recognize that every experience, every spark of beauty is a window into something infinite. It is the art of returning, of lifting the soul beyond shadows through intellect into the silent embrace of unity. Pythagorean Philosophy. Pythagorean philosophy is the belief that the universe itself is written in the language of numbers, that beneath the chaos of existence lies a perfect mathematical harmony binding all things together. To the Pythagoreans, numbers were not just symbols for counting, but living forces, sacred principles that shape the cosmos. They believed that music, geometry, and even the movements of the stars revealed the hidden order of reality, and that by understanding this order, the soul could rise closer to truth and purity. Pythagoras taught that the soul is immortal and endlessly reborn, trapped in cycles of existence until it achieves harmony with the divine. This is why his followers lived with strict discipline, avoiding indulgence, following rituals, and even refraining from eating certain foods believed to disturb the soul's balance. They believed that every action, every word, every thought resonated like a note in a grand symphony, either bringing the soul closer to cosmic order or casting it into discord. The most haunting vision of Pythagorean philosophy is the music of the spheres, the idea that planets and stars themselves move in perfect ratios, producing a sound too vast and eternal for human ears to hear. To live rightly was to tune oneself to this hidden music, to become an instrument of universal harmony rather than a source of dissonance. Pythagorean philosophy is both mystical and mathematical, demanding reason yet reaching for transcendence. It teaches that truth is not random, that existence is not chaos, but that beneath it all lies a structure of beauty, proportion, and eternal rhythm waiting to be discovered. Sophism is the philosophy of persuasion, a way of bending language and thought to shape reality itself. The sophists were wanderers, teachers, and provocateurs who declared that truth was not an eternal form or divine revelation, but something crafted by human beings through words, arguments, and perception. To them, power lay not in discovering some hidden absolute, but in mastering the art of rhetoric, the ability to convince, to move crowds, to make the weaker argument appear stronger, and to weave belief out of sound and speech. In a world where politics ruled and justice was contested in the open assembly, the sophists held up a mirror to society's hunger for influence. They showed that reason alone could not win battles, only persuasion could. This made them both admired and despised. Admired because they armed citizens with the tools to rise in power, despised because their teachings exposed the fragile nature of what people called truth. For if truth can be swayed by eloquence, if justice shifts depending on who argues it better, then what foundation does society truly rest upon? Figures like Protagoras declared, "Man is the measure of all things," tearing down the idea of universal standards. To the sophists, reality was subjective, shaped by perspective, culture, and moment. Their critics accused them of corruption, of replacing wisdom with manipulation, but beneath the charges lies a profound insight that human beings do not live by facts alone, but by the stories we tell, the language we trust, the voices that sway our hearts. Sophism reveals the haunting power of words, the way they can liberate or deceive, uplift or enslave, and reminds us that language itself is the battlefield of human destiny. Eleatic School. The Eleatic School is a philosophy that strikes like lightning against the restless illusions of change. Born in the ancient city of Elea, it challenged the very fabric of how humans perceive reality. Parmenides, the school's most profound voice, declared that all movement, all becoming, all transformation is nothing but an illusion of the senses. What truly exists is eternal, unchanging, indivisible, being itself. To him, the shifting world we see is a deception, a mirage spun by appearances, while beneath it lies an eternal unity, still and unbroken. This vision was radical, unsettling, even offensive to common sense. We see rivers flowing, seasons turning, lives being born and fading away. Yet Parmenides argued that these are shadows dancing on the surface, not reality itself. To embrace his teaching is to confront the possibility that everything we cling to as certain, time, change, death, is nothing more than a trick of perception. His student Zeno sharpened this truth with paradoxes that shattered logic itself. He asked, how can motion exist if it must first cross infinite divisions of space? His riddles tied the mind into knots, forcing it to see that reason and appearances were in conflict, that the senses cannot be trusted to reveal what is real. The Eleatic School demands that we pierce through the veil of the world and contemplate the eternal silence beneath. It is a philosophy that strips away comfort and forces us to confront the possibility that truth is not in what changes, but in what endures, timeless, unyielding, beyond the grasp of mortal eyes. Confucianism. Confucianism is not merely a philosophy, but a way of living that weaves the individual into the fabric of humanity. It teaches that harmony begins not in distant heavens, but in the simple bonds of family, community, and society. At its heart lies Ren, humaneness, the deep compassion that flows between people when they choose respect and empathy over selfishness. Confucius saw the world torn by chaos and believed order could be restored not through force, but through virtue, ritual, and the cultivation of moral character. To live Confucianism is to recognize that every action ripples outward. The way you speak to your parents shapes the heart of your home. The way you treat a stranger plants the seed of peace or conflict in the world beyond. Through Li, the rituals of conduct, one learns to honor the sacredness in everyday interactions, whether bowing to an elder, greeting a guest, or fulfilling a promise. These rituals are not empty gestures. They are the threads that bind a society together, transforming disorder into harmony. Confucius taught that a true leader rules not by punishment, but by example, that the greatest strength is found in virtue, not power. When the ruler is just, the people follow. When the father is kind, the child learns loyalty. When the friend is trustworthy, love deepens. Confucianism insists that goodness is contagious, that one act of righteousness can lift an entire community. It is a call to live with dignity, to honor tradition, to respect those who came before, and to nurture the bonds that make us human. In Confucianism, the path to peace is not escape from the world, but devotion to making the world whole. Taoism. Taoism is the philosophy of flowing with life instead of fighting against it, a wisdom that tells us the universe moves with a rhythm far greater than human will. At its heart is the Tao, the way, the eternal path that cannot be seen yet shapes everything. The Tao is the current beneath existence, the silent river that carries stars through the heavens and seasons through the earth. To resist it is to suffer. To align with it is to find peace. Laozi, the sage of the Tao, wrote that the greatest power comes from yielding, just as water overcomes stone, not through force but through persistence. Taoism teaches that softness is strength, that emptiness is usefulness, that silence carries more truth than endless words. It asks us to step away from the frantic noise of ambition, the obsession with control, and instead sink into the effortless state of Wu Wei, action without struggle, movement in harmony with the natural flow. The Taoist sees the world not as something to conquer, but as something to belong to. Mountains, rivers, winds, and forests are not obstacles but teachers. To live by the Tao is to let go of rigid plans and fixed identities, to dissolve into the vastness of existence until one feels the same quiet rhythm that moves the moon across the sky. Taoism awakens a deep calm, reminding us that life does not need to be forced into shape. Like water, we are meant to flow, to bend, to adapt, to return again and again to the boundless way that carries all things. Legalism. Legalism is the philosophy of order built through power, a worldview that strips away illusions of kindness or virtue and insists that human beings are driven by self-interest, ambition, and fear. In ancient China, the legalists declared that society could not be held together by morality or ritual alone, for people are unreliable when guided only by conscience. Instead, they demanded strict laws, harsh punishments, and absolute authority as the only way to control chaos and forge stability. To the legalists, harmony was not born from compassion, but from discipline, and peace was not the absence of conflict, but the mastery of control. Think of a ruler facing a restless empire, citizens who rebel, officials who scheme, generals who betray. The legalists offered a brutal clarity: trust no one, reward obedience, crush defiance. Han Feizi, one of the most influential voices of legalism, warned that rulers who governed with softness would be devoured by the greed of men. In his writings, he compared humanity to crooked wood. It cannot be straightened without fire and blade. To him, law was not a guide but a weapon, a force that made obedience the only path of survival. Though feared for its severity, legalism carved empires from chaos. It unified fractured states under the Qin dynasty, laying the foundations of China's enduring structure. But beneath its iron rule lies a truth that unsettles the heart, that control built on fear can command obedience, yet it extinguishes trust, compassion, and freedom. Legalism stands as a reminder of the price of order, a philosophy that embraces the cold efficiency of law over the warmth of human virtue. Mohism. Mohism is a philosophy of fierce compassion born in the heart of ancient China that defied the arrogance of power and the indifference of tradition. Founded by Mozi, it rose in opposition to the ritual-heavy Confucianism of the elites, insisting instead that what matters most is universal love, impartial care for all people, not just family, clan, or ruler. Mozi looked at a world torn apart by war, greed, and hierarchy, and declared that the cure was not more ceremony or blind obedience, but the radical act of treating every human life as equally valuable. This teaching was not a gentle suggestion, but a demand, urgent and uncompromising. Mohism condemned lavish funerals, extravagant music, and costly luxuries, because these wasted resources that could have fed the hungry or protected the weak. It rejected aggression, teaching that wars of conquest are nothing more than mass murder, dressed up in banners and pride. In a time where kings sought glory, Mohism shouted that true greatness lies in lifting the suffering from the shoulders of the people. Mozi himself lived simply, leading by example, walking from city to city to stop wars, even climbing the walls of besieged towns to demonstrate defenses that could protect the innocent. He believed the will of heaven was not mystery or ritual, but benevolence, urging humans to align themselves with justice by practicing care without boundaries. Mohism is a call to strip away favoritism, to tear down the walls between us and them. It is a cry for radical equality, a demand for love that does not measure, a vision of a world where morality means action and action means saving lives. Yin Yang School. The Yin Yang School is the philosophy of balance, a vision of the universe where opposites are not enemies but partners in an eternal dance. It teaches that life is woven from two primal forces, yin, the dark, receptive, nurturing principle, and yang, the bright, active, assertive principle. These forces are not static but flow into one another, rising and falling in endless cycles, creating the rhythm of existence itself. To understand yin and yang is to understand that day gives birth to night, that growth follows decay, that harmony is not found in choosing one over the other, but in accepting their interplay. Imagine the turning of the seasons. The warmth of summer yields to the cold of winter, only for spring to return with new life. The Yin Yang School sees this not as conflict, but as the universe breathing. Illness and health, joy and sorrow, strength and weakness all belong to this pattern. Nothing is permanent and nothing is absolute. Every peak carries the seed of decline, and every valley contains the promise of renewal. This philosophy touches not only nature, but the human heart. To live in accordance with yin and yang is to embrace change rather than resist it, to recognize that suffering can give depth to joy, that stillness can empower action, that vulnerability can coexist with strength. The wisdom of the Yin Yang School lies in reminding us that imbalance breeds chaos, but balance creates harmony. It is a philosophy that whispers the secret of peace. The world is not broken. It is always moving, always balancing, always whole. School of Names. The School of Names, also called the Logicians, was an ancient Chinese philosophy that tore reality apart with language and forced people to question the certainty of what they thought they knew. To its thinkers, words were not neutral tools, but cages that shaped thought, illusions that could bind the mind or, when broken, set it free. They reveled in paradox, in riddles that bent reason until it cracked, revealing the fragile boundary between what is true and what is only believed. One philosopher of this school would say, "A white horse is not a horse," and though it sounds absurd, he meant to awaken a deeper awareness that categories and labels are not the things themselves, that language deceives when we treat it as reality. They challenge the mind to see that a name is not the object, that concepts split unity into artificial fragments, and that clarity requires unraveling the tricks of words. The logicians use sharp logic not to comfort, but to disturb, to pull the rug out from under assumptions until nothing felt certain but the mystery itself. They force people to ask, if words fail to capture reality, then what is real? If every definition collapses under scrutiny, what is left? The school of names unsettled and fascinated, showing that truth slips through our grasp the moment we try to hold it too tightly. Their philosophy is not a calm stream, but a storm of thought, breaking illusions with paradox until the mind is left wide open, raw, and trembling before the vastness of what cannot be named. Agriculturalism. Agriculturalism is the philosophy of the soil, a call to return to the earth as the foundation of life, morality, and order. In ancient China, this school of thought emerged as a quiet rebellion against the glitter of wealth, the corruption of politics, and the endless hunger for conquest. Its core teaching was simple yet profound. The strength of a nation rests not in soldiers or merchants, but in farmers, for they alone produce the food that sustains all. To the agriculturalists, the act of tilling the land was not just labor, it was the highest virtue, a sacred rhythm that bound humanity to nature's cycles. They believed rulers should live simply, sharing in the work of the people rather than surrounding themselves with luxury. In their vision, society would flourish when leaders rejected greed and returned to humility, when power was rooted in service rather than exploitation. Farming was seen as the purest expression of human life, an act that brought stability, honesty, and harmony. Where trade and profit corrupted with endless desire, agriculture anchored existence in necessity and balance. The agriculturalists imagined a utopia where equality thrived, where every family worked the soil and shared in its bounty, where wealth and poverty dissolved into common sustenance. Their philosophy carried a subtle defiance against warlords who drained villages, against merchants who sought fortune in imbalance, against rulers who placed themselves above the earth that fed them. Though overshadowed by other schools, agriculturalism echoes a timeless truth. Civilization rises and falls not on the splendor of palaces, but on the fertility of the land and the dignity of those who work it. It is a philosophy that reminds us that beneath every empire, every city, and every dream lies the soil, waiting to be honored. Neo-Confucianism. Neo-Confucianism emerged as a powerful revival, a flame that reignited the old teachings of Confucius while weaving them with Buddhist depth and Taoist mystery. It was not content with mere ritual or social order. It reached into the very fabric of reality, asking why the world exists and how the soul should live within it. At its core, Neo-Confucianism taught that the universe is governed by Li, the principle, the eternal pattern that gives form and meaning to all things. To live well was to align the self with this cosmic order, to discipline desire, to cultivate virtue until the heart mirrored the harmony of heaven. Think of Zhu Xi, one of its greatest voices, who urged that knowledge and action were inseparable, that studying the classics was not an intellectual game, but a way of shaping the soul. For him, every blade of grass, every star in the sky, was a manifestation of Li, a lesson written into the universe itself. By observing the world, by questioning and reflecting, one could touch truth itself. Wang Yangming later took this further, declaring that the mind is not just a mirror of reality, but the very key to creating it. that the root of wisdom lies not in books alone, but in the illumination of conscience. Neo-Confucianism was both strict and liberating. It demanded discipline, study, and moral refinement, yet it promised that, in cultivating virtue, one was not just obeying social rules, but resonating with the pulse of the cosmos. It is a philosophy that sees every act, whether reading, governing, or tending to family, as a sacred chance to align the human heart with the infinite order of heaven. Xunzian Thought. Xunzian Thought is a philosophy of discipline and transformation, forged in the belief that human nature is not inherently good, but dangerously inclined towards selfishness, greed, and disorder. Xunzi looked at the chaos of his time and rejected the optimistic vision of earlier sages who claimed humans were born virtuous. Instead, he declared that left unchecked, people would descend into conflict and ruin, driven by desire without restraint. Yet he did not despair, because he also believed that through deliberate effort, education, and ritual, humanity could be shaped into something noble. For Xunzi, the raw impulses of human nature were like crooked wood, twisted and unruly. On its own, it cannot become straight, but with the careful hand of the carpenter, it can be carved into something strong and useful. So too, the mind and heart require the guiding chisel of ritual, law, and moral training. Virtue does not bloom naturally. It is cultivated like a field, watered with discipline, pruned with self-reflection, and strengthened through constant practice. This philosophy places immense importance on ritual, not as empty formality, but as the scaffolding that directs human desire toward harmony. By bowing to elders, honoring traditions, and adhering to moral codes, individuals learn to control their impulses and align themselves with a greater order. A society without ritual, Xunzi warned, would collapse into chaos, while a society with it could rise to enduring stability. Xunzian thought is both stern and hopeful. It tells us that humanity is flawed, but not doomed. It insists that greatness is earned, not given, that through structure, learning, and effort, even crooked wood can be made straight, and disorder can be shaped into civilization. Zhuangxian Daoism. Zhuangxian Daoism is the wild, dreamlike branch of Taoist thought that dissolves every boundary we cling to. It teaches that the world is not fixed, that truth is not absolute, and that freedom is found in embracing the fluid dance of existence. Zhuangzi, the wandering sage, spoke in parables and riddles, stories that laugh at human seriousness and strip away the illusion of control. His words tumble like rivers, playful yet piercing, forcing the listener to question whether anything we believe is as solid as it seems. One of his most haunting tales is the butterfly dream. Zhuangzi dreamt he was a butterfly, drifting in effortless flight, and when he awoke, he asked, was he Zhuangzi dreaming of being a butterfly, or a butterfly now dreaming of being Zhuangzi? In that single story, the walls between self and other, waking and dreaming, real and unreal, collapse into mist. For Zhuangzi, the point was not to find a final answer, but to surrender to the great uncertainty that shapes life. Zhuangxian Daoism rejects the rigidity of dogma and mocks the arrogance of certainty. It tells us that distinctions between good and bad, success and failure, even life and death, are shifting illusions. To cling to them is to suffer, but to flow beyond them is to taste freedom. It is a philosophy that laughs at power, undermines pride, and reminds us that wisdom is not found in control, but in release. Zhuangxian Daoism invites the soul to wander, to drift with the wind, to see joy and sorrow as passing clouds, and to awaken to the boundless freedom of being part of the Tao's endless, ever-changing dream. Vedanta. Vedanta is the philosophy of ultimate unity, a vision that pierces through the illusions of separation and whispers that all existence flows from one infinite source. Rooted in the Upanishads of ancient India, Vedanta teaches that beneath the ever-changing world of appearances lies Brahman, the eternal, limitless reality that is pure consciousness itself. The rivers, the stars, the bodies we inhabit, the thoughts we chase, all are fragments of this vast ocean, waves rising and falling without ever leaving the sea. To know Brahman is to awaken from the dream of individuality and realize that the self, the Atman, is not separate, but one with the Absolute. This realization is not just knowledge, but liberation. The chains of fear, grief, and desire dissolve when one understands that death is not an end, but a change of form, that suffering is born from mistaking the transient for the eternal. The sages of Vedanta declared that ignorance, avidya, is humanity's greatest prison, blinding us into clinging to possessions, titles, and fleeting pleasures. The path of Vedanta is the journey inward, peeling away illusion until only truth remains. For Shankara, one of Vedanta's greatest teachers, life itself was a play of shadows upon the wall, a divine illusion called Maya. He taught that freedom comes when we look beyond the shifting patterns and fix our gaze on the eternal light behind them. In this awakening, the soul discovers it was never small, never broken, never alone. It was infinite all along. Vedanta is a philosophy that dismantles the walls of the self, calling us to see the divine in all things and to rest in the stillness of unity where all seeking ends. Samkhya. Samkhya is one of the oldest and most hauntingly profound philosophies of India, a vision that divides existence into two eternal realities, Purusha, the pure consciousness that witnesses, and Prakriti, the boundless energy that creates. It whispers that everything we see, feel, and cling to, the body, the mind, the emotions, the entire swirling dance of the universe, is Prakriti in motion. Yet behind it all stands Purusha, silent and untouched, the eternal observer who never suffers, never changes, never dies. This philosophy strikes with unsettling clarity. All the chaos of life, all the turmoil of joy and grief, success and failure, belong to Prakriti. It is the ceaseless unfolding of nature, endlessly shifting, endlessly deceiving. But you, your true self, are not part of that storm. You are Purusha, the still witness behind the drama. The tragedy of human existence, Samkhya teaches, is that we mistake ourselves for the play. We believe we are the body that ages, the mind that fears, the ego that craves, and so we suffer, shackled by an identity that was never truly ours. Liberation comes from piercing this illusion, from realizing with shattering force that you are not the dancer but the watcher of the dance. When you withdraw identification from Prakriti's endless display, you awaken to your true nature as consciousness itself, untouched, serene, eternal. Samkhya does not rely on gods or rituals. It is a raw, uncompromising map of reality, offering freedom not through devotion, but through knowledge. It tells you that peace is already within reach, not by changing the world, but by remembering what you have always been, the silent witness, luminous and free. Yoga philosophy. Yoga philosophy is the ancient path of uniting body, mind, and spirit, a discipline that reaches far beyond the physical postures most people imagine today. At its core, yoga means union, the merging of the individual self with the universal, the dissolving of separation between the inner and outer worlds. It teaches that human suffering arises from ignorance, from mistaking the fleeting for the eternal, the material for the spiritual. Yoga is the art of stripping away these illusions, guiding the practitioner inward to the still center of the soul where peace already resides. The Yoga Sutras of Patanjali describe an eightfold path, beginning with self-restraint and discipline, moving through meditation and breath, and culminating in samadhi, a state of pure awareness, where the mind becomes still and the self merges with the infinite. This is not an escape from the world, but a transformation of perception, where one learns to see the divine in every breath, every moment, every being. In yoga philosophy, the body is a vessel, the breath a bridge, and the mind a restless ocean that must be calmed. Through practice, desires lose their grip, fears loosen their hold, and the endless chatter of thought begins to quiet. What remains is clarity, strength, and serenity, the realization that freedom does not come from controlling the world, but from mastering the self. To live in yoga is to live in alignment with nature, with truth, with the deepest essence of existence. It is the reminder that the peace we chase outside has always been within, waiting patiently for us to turn inward and awaken. Nyaya. Nyaya is the ancient Indian philosophy of logic and reasoning, a path that insists truth can be grasped not through blind faith, but through the sharp edge of the mind. It declares that liberation is possible, but only if one learns to distinguish reality from illusion with the discipline of inquiry. Where others sought enlightenment in silence or ritual, Nyaya demanded clarity, proof, and understanding. To its thinkers, ignorance was the root of suffering, and the cure was knowledge gained through precise reasoning. At the heart of Nyaya lies a system of logic as rigorous as any the world has known. It breaks thought into steps: perception, inference, comparison, and testimony. These are the gateways through which the mind encounters truth. A rustle in the forest can be reasoned into the presence of wind. Smoke rising from the hill can be traced back to fire. Nothing is taken at face value. Nothing is accepted without questioning. This relentless pursuit of proof gives the seeker not only clarity, but freedom from the shadows of doubt and deception. Yet Nyaya is not cold abstraction. It is a philosophy burning with urgency, for it declares that only true knowledge can shatter the cycle of birth and death. To mistake illusion for truth is to remain trapped in suffering, but to know reality as it is opens the path to liberation. Nyaya is the fire of reason in a world clouded by confusion. It is the refusal to accept appearances, the courage to demand proof, and the faith that within the discipline of thought lies the power to pierce illusion and touch ultimate freedom. Vaisheshika. Vaisheshika is the philosophy of precision, a vision of the universe broken down into its smallest, irreducible parts. Emerging in ancient India, it teaches that reality is composed of fundamental categories: substance, quality, activity, relation, universality, particularity, and inherence, each interwoven to form the fabric of existence. At its heart lies the belief in atoms, not as symbols but as real, eternal particles that combine and separate to create the endless dance of the cosmos. Long before modern science spoke of matter, Vaisheshika proclaimed that the world was not chaos but order, governed by natural laws that could be understood through reason. The Vaisheshika sages believed truth is not hidden in mystical abstraction, but revealed through careful classification and observation. Every object, every movement, every transformation was to be studied and placed within its rightful category. This act of naming and defining was more than intellectual. It was a way of piercing the veil of confusion to see the universe as it truly is, structured, logical, and bound by eternal principles. Yet beyond its atomic theory, Vaisheshika reached into the spiritual. It held that while atoms form the body and world, the soul itself is eternal, untouched by the shifting of matter. Liberation, or moksha, comes when one realizes the distinction between the eternal self and the impermanent material world, freeing the soul from the cycle of rebirth. Vaisheshika is both scientific and spiritual, a philosophy that marries reason with transcendence. It calls us to see the hidden architecture of existence, to marvel at the smallest building blocks of life, and to recognize that even in the tiniest particle lies the key to the infinite. Mimamsa. Mimamsa is a philosophy forged in devotion to truth as action, a worldview that insists The power of life lies not in abstract speculation, but in the sacred rhythm of duty. Born in the Vedic tradition of India, it teaches that the universe is woven together by ritual, by words, by acts performed with precision and reverence. To the Mimamsaka, the Vedas are not just old hymns, but the eternal sound of cosmic law, a voice without beginning, a truth that commands rather than pleads. This philosophy does not ask whether gods exist or debate the mysteries of creation. It looks instead to the force of ritual itself, claiming that when a sacrifice is performed correctly, its effects ripple through the cosmos regardless of divine intervention. The act is its own power, the word its own flame, the ritual its own truth. It is a vision that shifts authority away from gods and onto the human ability to act in harmony with eternal order. Yet beneath its apparent rigidity lies a profound teaching that meaning in life is not found in endless questioning, but in deliberate living. Mimamsa teaches discipline, precision, and responsibility. It reminds us that every action carries weight, that words spoken and duties fulfilled shape reality itself. It insists that liberation is not escape from the world, but participation in its sacred structure, a steady alignment with what has always been. To embrace Mimamsa is to see the ordinary as charged with power, to treat duty not as a burden, but as the very heartbeat of existence. It is a philosophy that calls us to stand upright in the flow of life, anchored in action, bound to truth through the discipline of devotion. Charvaka or Lokayata. Charvaka, also known as Lokayata, is the bold philosophy of radical materialism, a voice that shattered illusions in ancient India by declaring that only this world is real. It rejected gods, rituals, and the promise of an afterlife, insisting that all such beliefs were inventions to control and exploit the masses. For the Charvaka, the soul does not survive death. There is no heaven or hell, and consciousness itself arises only from the body, just as the scent of a flower arises from the petals and vanishes when they are gone. This philosophy dares to face mortality without flinching, proclaiming that since life is short and finite, the true purpose is to embrace pleasure and avoid suffering. Yet, this was not a call to reckless indulgence. It was a call to authenticity, to savor joy while it exists, and to reject false hopes that bind people in fear. Where others sought liberation through asceticism or divine favor, Charvaka sought liberation through reason, through freedom from superstition, and through living fully in the present moment. It was a philosophy of defiance, ridiculed and suppressed by its rivals, yet it carried an unshakable power, the courage to say that truth is not found in sacred texts, but in direct experience. Fire burns because it is hot, not because scripture commands it. The world is what it is, not what priests claim it to be. Charvaka or Lokayata is the raw cry of life itself, insisting that meaning must be carved from the here and now. It is the reminder that existence is fleeting, and therefore every breath, every taste, every moment is infinitely precious. Ajivika. Ajivika is one of the most haunting and radical philosophies of ancient India, a worldview built on the unyielding power of fate. It taught that every event in life, from birth to death, joy to sorrow, is predetermined by cosmic law and cannot be changed. To the Ajivika, free will was an illusion, effort a deception, and struggle a futile attempt to fight what has already been written. They believe the universe moves according to an unbreakable destiny, like stars following their paths across the sky, untouched by human desire or resistance. This fatalism was not despair, but a brutal clarity. Imagine the weight lifting from your shoulders as you realize that nothing you do can alter what must come. The failures, the betrayals, the moments of anguish, all of them are threads already woven into the fabric of your existence. The Ajivika taught that suffering arises when we fight the inevitable, when we demand that the universe bend to our will, but when we surrender, when we accept that life unfolds as it must, we are freed from the torment of expectation. Their monks lived austere lives, stripped of possessions, wandering without attachment, embodying the belief that nothing belonged to them because nothing was ever theirs to begin with. Even morality, to them, was not a matter of choice, but of destiny, each soul bound to its path until it reached its final end. Ajivika philosophy is both unsettling and liberating. It stares straight into the heart of powerlessness and finds a strange peace there, a surrender that dissolves anxiety, a calm born from knowing that what will be has already been decided. Jain philosophy. Jain philosophy is the path of radical nonviolence, a vision of existence that insists every living being, whether human, animal, insect, or even the smallest microbe, possesses a soul. It teaches that life is sacred in all its forms, and that to harm another is to wound the vast web of existence itself. At its core lies ahimsa, the principle of nonviolence so absolute that even thoughts and words must be purified of cruelty. For the Jain sage, kindness is not a choice but the very law of reality, and compassion is the key that unlocks liberation. The Jains saw the universe as eternal, without creator, endlessly cycling through birth, death, and rebirth. Souls are bound to this cycle by karma, not as divine judgment but as a natural weight of one's actions, thoughts, and intentions. Every deed leaves a residue that clings to the soul, keeping it heavy, clouded, unable to rise. To live carelessly is to accumulate chains, but to live with discipline, restraining desire, speaking truth, practicing austerity, is to cleanse the soul until it shines in its purest form. Great teachers like Mahavira dedicated their lives to showing that liberation comes not from conquest or possession, but from renunciation and self-mastery. The ideal Jain ascetic renounces violence so completely that they may sweep the ground before walking, wear a cloth over their mouth to avoid harming even the smallest life, and cultivate detachment from the body itself. Jain philosophy is an uncompromising reminder of the weight of every action, of the invisible bonds between all beings. It declares that true freedom is not domination, but release, not indulgence, but restraint, and that the soul's highest destiny is to rise beyond harm into infinite awareness and bliss. Theravada Buddhism. Theravada Buddhism is the path of clarity and discipline, often called the Way of the Elders, the most ancient surviving school of the Buddha's teaching. It rests on the conviction that suffering is woven into the fabric of human life, born from craving, attachment, and ignorance. Yet it also declares with luminous certainty that freedom from suffering is possible, and that liberation is not a gift from gods, but a journey each soul must walk with mindfulness, wisdom, and effort. At its heart lies the Four Noble Truths: that suffering exists, that it has a cause, that it can end, and that the path to its end is the Noble Eightfold Way. This is not a dogma, but a map, guiding one to live with right understanding, right action, and right meditation. Theravada teaches that the highest goal is nirvana, the extinguishing of desire, the cooling of the fires of greed, hatred, and delusion, until the mind rests in unshakable peace. Theravada's practices are austere, its monks and nuns renouncing possessions and dedicating their lives to meditation, discipline, and the study of the Pali Canon, the earliest collection of the Buddha's words. But its teachings are not only for monks. They invite anyone to pause, breathe, and see the impermanence of all things, the rise and fall of thoughts, the fleeting nature of joy and sorrow, the truth that clinging to what must pass only multiplies pain. Theravada Buddhism is a call to awaken. It whispers that liberation is not in some distant heaven, but here, now, in the silence of the mind, in the steady release of what weighs down the heart, until only freedom remains. Mahayana Buddhism. Mahayana Buddhism is the great vehicle of compassion, a philosophy that refuses to seek freedom for oneself alone and instead vows to liberate all beings from suffering. It begins with the bodhisattva ideal, the decision to postpone final enlightenment until every living soul can be carried across the ocean of suffering together. This vision transforms awakening from a solitary pursuit into a boundless act of love, where the measure of wisdom is not escape, but the depth of compassion one can embody. At its heart lies the teaching of emptiness, shunyata. Mahayana declares that nothing exists independently, that all things arise in connection, like waves on the same ocean. When you look deeply, you find no solid self, no separate identity, only a web of interdependence stretching across time and space. This truth shatters the illusions of isolation and awakens the realization that to harm another is to harm yourself, and to love another is to embrace the whole universe. Mahayana sutras speak in vast, cosmic imagery, countless Buddhas across endless realms, universes blossoming like lotus flowers, compassion expanding without limit. Yet within this grandeur, the path is deeply intimate. A single act of kindness, a moment of patience, a choice to place another's well-being above your own becomes a step toward universal liberation. Mahayana Buddhism stirs the heart because it tells us that enlightenment is not escape from the world, but immersion in it, not detachment from humanity, but a deeper embrace of it. It is the call to see every being as sacred, to take on their suffering as your own, and to walk the endless path of compassion with courage and love. Madhyamaka. Madhyamaka is the philosophy of the middle, a profound path carved by Nagarjuna that dismantles the extremes of existence and non-existence, of permanence and annihilation, of being and nothingness. It teaches that everything we cling to as solid, fixed, and independent is in truth empty, empty of inherent nature, empty of separateness, empty of permanence. Yet this emptiness is not a void of despair, but a liberation, a space of boundless possibility where reality is no longer imprisoned by rigid concepts. Nagarjuna struck like lightning against the dogmas of his age. To those who claimed that things truly exist, he showed their dependence on causes, conditions, and perceptions. To those who claimed nothing exists, he revealed that even emptiness itself is empty, an antidote, not a new prison. In this way, Madhyamaka dissolves illusions without replacing them with another illusion. It is a philosophy that demands humility before the mystery of existence, stripping away the arrogance of certainty and opening the heart to what is beyond grasp. To walk the Madhyamaka path is to stand in the still point between extremes. It is to see that joy and sorrow, life and death, self and other are all woven from conditions, arising and fading like waves upon water. Clinging to them as absolute is the root of suffering, but seeing their emptiness transforms suffering into wisdom. Madhyamaka does not give easy answers, it takes them away. Yet in the space left behind, something luminous appears, freedom, compassion, and the serene courage to live without clinging to illusions of permanence or fear of nothingness. It is philosophy as medicine, healing the mind by cutting through the chains of false certainty. Yogachara. Yogachara is a philosophy that turns the gaze inward and declares that the universe itself is shaped by the mind. Emerging from Mahayana Buddhism, it insists that reality, as we know it, is nothing more than a projection of consciousness, a theater in which thoughts and perceptions weave the very fabric of the world. To the Yogacaran, what we see outside is not independent matter, but the reflection of seeds planted deep within the storehouse of the mind, the alaya vijnana. Every experience, every joy, every wound leaves its trace there, and from those hidden seeds grows the reality we mistake for solid and unchanging. This vision is both unsettling and liberating. It means that the suffering we blame on the world is not forced upon us from outside. it is born from within. The fears, desires, and illusions that haunt us are projections of our own mind. To heal, then, is not to conquer the world, but to purify consciousness itself. Through discipline, meditation, and insight, one can burn away the seeds of ignorance and plant instead the seeds of clarity, compassion, and wisdom. Imagine standing before life's chaos and realizing it is your own mind that colors everything. Anger turning moments into poison, compassion transforming pain into understanding. Yogachara teaches that when the mind awakens to its true nature, the illusion of duality, self and other, subject and object, dissolves. What remains is luminous awareness, free of distortion. Yogachara is not merely philosophy, but practice, a relentless demand to take responsibility for perception itself. It calls you to master the hidden depths of consciousness, to cleanse the mind's storehouse, and to awaken to a reality that was never outside you, but always within. Zen or Chan Buddhism. Zen, known in China as Chan, is the philosophy of direct experience, a path that strips away words, rituals, and intellectual grasping to reveal the raw truth of existence. At its core, Zen teaches that enlightenment is not a distant goal, but the reality already present in this very moment, hidden only by the fog of thought and attachment. It is a philosophy that urges us to stop chasing, stop clinging, and simply awaken to what is here, now. Zen masters often shattered their students' expectations with paradox and shock. A sudden shout, a slap, or a riddle-like koan, such as "What is the sound of one hand clapping?" were not meant to confuse, but to break the grip of logic, to jolt the mind out of its endless search for answers and into the silence of pure awareness. For Zen, wisdom is not found in scriptures alone, but in the taste of tea, the sound of rain, the sweep of a brush across paper. Every act can be meditation when performed with complete presence. To practice Zen is to sit in stillness, observing thoughts rise and fall like clouds drifting across an open sky, learning that the mind itself is not a cage, but a vast expanse. It is to discover that the self you cling to is an illusion, and that freedom lies in dissolving the boundary between self and world. Zen or Chan Buddhism is the art of awakening to the ordinary, where the simplest things reveal the deepest truths. It whispers that enlightenment is not somewhere else. It is the way a flower blooms, the way breath enters and leaves, the way silence contains everything. Pure Land Buddhism. Pure Land Buddhism is the path of hope, a philosophy that offers weary souls a vision of liberation through faith, devotion, and surrender. It teaches that in the midst of this turbulent world, where suffering feels endless and enlightenment seems impossibly far, there exists a realm of purity and peace, the Pure Land of Amitabha Buddha. This realm is not tainted by greed, hatred, or illusion, but shines with infinite light and boundless compassion. For those who call upon Amitabha with sincerity, the promise is rebirth into this pure land, where the obstacles of human weakness dissolve and the path to awakening becomes clear. At its core is the practice of reciting the Buddha's name, Namu Amida Butsu, a chant not of empty words, but of trust and longing. Each recitation is a reaching out of the heart, a cry that bridges the gap between human frailty and divine compassion. It is the assurance that one does not walk alone, that even in despair, there is a hand extended from beyond, guiding the soul toward light. Pure Land. Buddhism does not deny suffering. It looks at the brokenness of existence and answers with mercy. It reminds us that when our own strength fails, when meditation falters and wisdom feels unreachable, grace remains. In that surrender is not weakness, but a deeper strength, the courage to trust in compassion greater than oneself. Pure Land Buddhism is the promise that beyond the noise and struggle of this world lies a realm of serenity, where every soul can find refuge, healing, and the gentle embrace of infinite light. Vajrayana Buddhism. Vajrayana Buddhism is the thunderbolt path, a philosophy and practice that seeks to shatter illusions with the sudden force of awakening. Known as the diamond vehicle, it declares that enlightenment is not a distant goal reached after countless lifetimes, but a living possibility available here and now through the harnessing of body, speech, and mind. Where other traditions emphasize slow ascension, Vajrayana embraces the intensity of transformation, turning every passion, every fear, every shadow of the mind into fuel for liberation. It teaches that the very obstacles we dread, anger, desire, ignorance, are not enemies to be destroyed, but energies to be transmuted. Like poison turned into medicine, these emotions, when skillfully guided, become gateways to wisdom. The practitioner steps into a sacred world where rituals, mantras, mandalas, and visualizations are not mere symbols but living keys, unlocking the hidden potential of the mind. Deities are visualized not as external gods, but as mirrors of one's own awakened nature, reminding the seeker that the divine already resides within. The thunderbolt of Vajrayana strikes hardest in its radical vision of reality, that every moment, no matter how ordinary or chaotic, is a manifestation of enlightenment. Eating, walking, breathing, all can be transformed into sacred acts when performed with awareness. Death itself becomes not an end, but a profound transition, a doorway where liberation can be grasped if the mind is trained to recognize its true nature. Vajrayana is not a gentle path. It is fierce, demanding, and powerful. It calls the seeker to burn away delusion in the fire of awareness, to embrace existence fully without fear, and to realize that the very life we live, raw and unpolished, is already the diamond of awakening. Dzogchen. Dzogchen, often called the Great Perfection, is the lightning strike of Tibetan philosophy, a radical teaching that points directly to the heart of awareness itself. It whispers that you are already what you seek, that beneath the turbulence of thought and the weight of striving lies a mind vast, luminous, and free. Unlike paths that climb step by step through ritual, discipline, and reasoning, Dzogchen cuts through with a single blade, the recognition of your true nature, here and now. It begins with a daring claim that the essence of the mind is pure from the very beginning. Like a clear sky hidden behind clouds, this pristine awareness is never stained by fear, anger, or desire. These emotions are passing storms, fierce but fleeting, while the sky itself remains untouched. The practice of Dzogchen is not to fight the storms, nor to chase after the light, but to recognize the sky within yourself, vast and unshakable. Masters of Dzogchen speak of Rigpa, the naked awareness that shines when all grasping ceases. It cannot be forced, it cannot be manufactured. It is revealed in moments of deep stillness, when the mind stops chasing its own shadows. In that recognition, the tight knots of suffering begin to loosen, for there is nothing left to hold on to, nothing to fear losing. Dzogchen is not philosophy as argument, but as awakening. It does not beg you to climb mountains of logic, but to open your eyes to the radiance already blazing within. It is a call to dissolve the illusions of striving and rest in the boundless expanse of awareness itself, infinite, timeless, and free. Tiantai Buddhism. Tiantai Buddhism is the philosophy of harmony and integration, a school that sought to weave together the Buddha's vast and complex teachings into one grand vision of truth. Emerging in China, it taught that all doctrines, whether simple or profound, were stepping stones toward ultimate enlightenment. At its heart lies the belief that the Lotus Sutra contains the highest expression of the Buddha's wisdom, revealing that every being, no matter how lost, broken, or burdened, possesses the seed of Buddhahood within. Tiantai masters proclaimed that reality is not divided between sacred and ordinary. Every thought, every sensation, every breath contains within it the whole of existence. The doctrine of 3,000 realms in a single thought moment captures this vision. Within a single instant of awareness, the entire universe is reflected, every joy, every sorrow, every possibility intertwined. To realize this is to see that enlightenment is not something to be attained in another lifetime, but a truth pulsing in every moment of life. Meditation in Tiantai was not just about stillness, but about penetrating insight, observing the mind as it shifts between clarity and confusion, learning that even delusion itself can become a doorway to awakening. Its teachings dissolve the hierarchy between monk and layperson, insisting that the path is open to all who dare to see deeply into the nature of existence. Tiantai Buddhism is a reminder that nothing is wasted, nothing is excluded. Every flaw, every failure, every triumph is part of the same vast tapestry. It teaches that the universe lives within you, and in the smallest flicker of consciousness, eternity reveals itself. Huayan Buddhism. Huayan Buddhism is the philosophy of interbeing, a dazzling vision that sees the universe as an infinite web where every single thing contains and reflects every other. It teaches that nothing exists in isolation. Each leaf mirrors the entire forest, each wave carries the whole ocean, and each moment contains eternity. The Huayan masters describe reality as Indra's net, an endless cosmic web studded with jewels, each jewel reflecting all others without end. To truly grasp this vision is to feel the boundaries of self dissolve, replaced by an overwhelming sense of unity and wonder. In Huayan thought, enlightenment is not the escape from the world, but the recognition that the world itself is already sacred. Every speck of dust, every fleeting sound, every heartbeat is a doorway into infinity. This philosophy insists that the ultimate truth is not somewhere distant, but present in the most ordinary of things, hidden in plain sight, waiting for us to open our eyes. Huayan Buddhism stirs the heart with its radical compassion. If each being reflects all others, then to harm one is to harm the whole, and to lift one is to lift the entire universe. Compassion becomes not a duty, but a natural response, as inseparable from us as breath. To live in the Huayan vision is to walk through life seeing infinity in every glance, to feel the weight and beauty of interconnectedness pressing into every moment. It is to understand that you are never small, never alone, because within you shines the reflection of all existence, and within all existence you are eternally reflected. Zoroastrian Philosophy. Zoroastrian philosophy is the fire of duality, a vision that sees existence as a battlefield between light and darkness, truth and falsehood, creation and destruction. Born in ancient Persia through the teachings of the prophet Zarathustra, it declares that the universe is shaped by two forces, Ahura Mazda, the wise lord of truth and goodness, and Angra Mainyu, the spirit of deceit and chaos. Humanity is not a passive spectator in the struggle. We are warriors, called to choose with every thought, word, and deed whether we serve the path of light or feed the shadows of destruction. At its heart lies Asha, the principle of truth, order, and righteousness. To live in alignment with Asha is to honor life, to protect creation, to speak honestly, and to act with justice. Its opposite, Druj, is the lie, the corruption that unravels harmony, infects the mind with greed, cruelty, and violence. The world becomes sacred ground where every decision tips the balance between these cosmic powers. This transforms life itself into a holy responsibility. Every breath matters. Every choice echoes in eternity. Zoroastrianism reveres fire as a symbol of purity and divine wisdom, not as an idol, but as a reminder of the ever-burning presence of truth. Within its flame lies the call to live with clarity, to burn away deceit, and to stand unshaken in the face of darkness. Even death is not an escape, but part of the eternal test, where souls are judged by the weight of their deeds and either rise to light or fall into shadow. Zoroastrian philosophy is both a warning and a promise. The universe trembles on the edge of choice, and within every human heart lies the power to tilt creation toward the triumph of light. Zurvanism. Zurvanism is a stark and mesmerizing branch of ancient Persian thought, a vision that dared to trace the entire cosmos back to one chilling source, infinite time, where traditional Zoroastrianism saw a universe shaped by the struggle of Ahura Mazda, the Lord of Light, and Angra Mainyu, the spirit of darkness. Zurvanism declared that both were children of Zurvan, the boundless god of time. It taught that before creation there was only Zurvan, vast and formless, and out of Zurvan's desire for offspring came the twin forces of good and evil. Thus, light and shadow, order and chaos, sprang from the same womb, bound together under the tyranny of eternity. This philosophy unsettled the faithful because it dissolved the neat certainty of moral dualism. If both gods are sons of time, then good and evil are not eternal enemies, but brothers, destined to clash within a universe that time itself governs. Zurvanism shifts the question of human struggle from a battle of divine allegiance to an acceptance of fate, where even gods are not free, for time swallows all. The teaching carried a quiet terror, for it suggested that every victory, every loss, every act of creation and destruction unfolds according to the unbreakable decree of Zurvan. Yet, there was also release in its vision. To see time as the ultimate principle was to see beyond the illusions of permanence, to recognize that even darkness and suffering flow within a cosmic order beyond human control. Zurvanism whispers that beneath the noise of struggle lies inevitability, that existence itself is the unfolding of a clock without beginning or end, where all beings, gods and mortals alike, are but sparks moving through the endless night of time. Manichaeism. Manichaeism is the philosophy of cosmic struggle, a vision that sees existence as a battlefield between two eternal forces, light and darkness. It was born from the teachings of the prophet Mani, who wove together elements of Christianity, Zoroastrianism, and Buddhism into a single, radical worldview. In Manichaeism, the universe is not a place of harmony, but of conflict, where the soul is a fragment of divine light trapped within the prison of matter, yearning to return to its celestial home. The human condition in this philosophy is one of exile. Every desire, every hunger, every passion is seen as the chain of darkness, binding the soul to suffering and illusion. Yet within each person glows a spark of light, a shard of the divine, waiting to be freed. Salvation comes not through blind faith, but through gnosis, knowledge of this eternal struggle, and through the discipline to align oneself with light against the weight of the material world. Mani's followers believed that life itself was the stage for this war. Acts of compassion, purity, and truth strengthened the realm of light, while greed, violence, and indulgence fed the forces of darkness. To eat, to speak, to act was never neutral. Every choice tilted the balance in the cosmic scale. The faithful lived with fierce awareness, convinced that each moment carried eternal consequence. Manichaeism is a haunting vision of existence, both terrifying and empowering. It insists that within our fragile bodies burns a divine essence, and that every action we take is part of a war older than time, a war in which the fate of the soul hangs in the balance. Manichaeism. Manichaeism is the philosophy of cosmic struggle, a vision that sees existence as a battlefield between two eternal forces, light and darkness. It was born from the teachings of the prophet Mani, who wove together elements of Christianity, Zoroastrianism, and Buddhism into a single, radical worldview. In Manichaeism, the universe is not a place of harmony, but of conflict, where the soul is a fragment of divine light trapped within the prison of matter, yearning to return to its celestial home. The human condition in this philosophy is one of exile. Every desire, every hunger, every passion is seen as the chain of darkness, binding the soul to suffering and illusion. Yet within each person glows a spark of light, a shard of the divine, waiting to be freed. Salvation comes not through blind faith, but through gnosis, knowledge of this eternal struggle, and through the discipline to align oneself with light against the weight of the material world. Mani's followers believed that life itself was the stage for this war. Acts of compassion, purity, and truth strengthened the realm of light, while greed, violence, and indulgence fed the forces of darkness. To eat, to speak, to act was never neutral. Every choice tilted the balance in the cosmic scale. The faithful lived with fierce awareness, convinced that each moment carried eternal consequence. Manichaeism is a haunting vision of existence, both terrifying and empowering. It insists that within our fragile bodies burns a divine essence, and that every action we take is part of a war older than time, a war in which the fate of the soul hangs in the balance. Mazdakism. Mazdakism is the fiery Persian philosophy of justice and equality, a vision that rose in a world ruled by greed and hierarchy to demand balance, compassion, and the sharing of life's gifts. It was not only a religious movement, but a call to overturn the structures that chained humanity in suffering. Mazdak, its teacher, declared that wealth, power, and pleasure should not be hoarded by a few while others starved. He saw greed as a poison that shattered harmony, and he sought to heal the world by restoring fairness to both society and the soul. At its heart, Mazdakism taught that the universe is a struggle between light and darkness, order and chaos, compassion and cruelty. Every act of generosity nourishes the light. Every act of selfishness feeds the dark. Mazdak urged his followers to live simply, to practice kindness, to reject violence, and to share resources so that no one would be left in hunger or despair. It was a philosophy of radical empathy, one that demanded not only personal virtue, but social transformation. Mazdak's vision was dangerous to kings and nobles, for it threatened the very foundations of their power. To proclaim that no one has the right to excess while others lack the basics was to ignite rebellion. His movement was met with resistance, crushed by those who feared equality more than chaos. Yet the flame of Mazdakism still burns as a reminder that philosophy is not only about thought, but about courage. The courage to stand against injustice, to believe in a world where compassion triumphs over greed, and to sacrifice comfort in the pursuit of light. Mithraism. Mithraism is the philosophy of hidden light, a mystery cult of the ancient Roman world that wrapped its wisdom in secrecy, ritual, and sacred brotherhood. Centered around the god Mithras, a divine figure of truth, justice, and cosmic order, it drew its followers into underground temples where the stars themselves seemed to watch in silence. Unlike public religions that displayed their gods in open temples, Mithraism thrived in shadow, binding its initiates together through sacred oaths and symbolic rites that promised strength, protection, and transcendence. At its heart lies the myth of Mithras slaying the cosmic bull, a sacrifice that unleashed life into the world, the plants, the animals, the cycles of fertility and renewal. To the Mithraic mind, this act was not just legend, but the eternal drama of creation and destruction, light breaking free from darkness. The initiate's journey mirrored this cosmic struggle. Through 7 grades of initiation, he was reborn again and again, shedding weakness, embracing courage, and aligning himself with the eternal order of the universe. Mithraism appealed especially to soldiers, men who lived and died by loyalty, discipline, and brotherhood. In the underground sanctuaries, they found a sacred reflection of their own lives, a community bound not by blood, but by initiation, a family forged in secrecy and struggle. The stars carved into the ceilings reminded them that their fates were tied not only to Rome, but to the cosmos itself. Mithraism is the whisper of hidden fire in a world of conquest and chaos, a philosophy that sought not to explain the world through reason, but to immerse the soul in ritual, sacrifice, and sacred allegiance, where truth was not spoken openly, but lived in silence and devotion. Illuminationism, or Ishraq. Illuminationism, or the philosophy of Ishraq, is a radiant flame in the history of thought, a vision born in Persia through the teachings of Shihab al-Din Suhrawardi. It is a philosophy that blends reason with revelation, logic with light, seeking not just to explain reality, but to illuminate it. At its heart lies the idea that existence is a hierarchy of lights, cascading from the ineffable light of lights down to the dimmest shadows of matter. To live, to think, to awaken is to climb this ladder of radiance, returning the soul to its source. Suhrawardi challenged the arid reasoning of dry philosophy, declaring that truth cannot be reached by logic alone. Knowledge, he said, is not simply acquired, it is unveiled. It comes not only from study, but from inner vision, from illumination that floods the heart like dawn after a long night. This was not mere metaphor. For the illuminationists, light was the very fabric of being, the essence that sustains everything. Darkness is not its opposite, but its absence, the shadow cast when the soul turns away. In this vision, philosophy becomes a mystical journey. The mind must be disciplined, but the soul must also be purified, for only the pure can bear the radiance of truth. It is a call to balance intellect with intuition, to embrace wisdom not only as concept, but as light that burns away ignorance. Illuminationism is the philosophy of awakening, urging us to look beyond appearances, to see the world as a play of shadows upon eternal radiance. It is a path where knowledge becomes light, and light becomes the bridge back to the divine source of all existence. Suhrawardi's philosophy. Suhrawardi's philosophy, often called the philosophy of illumination, is a radiant vision of truth where light becomes the very essence of existence. Shihab al-Din Suhrawardi, a Persian mystic and philosopher, taught that reality is a hierarchy of light cascading from the ultimate, infinite light of lights down to the dimmest shadows of material existence. Everything that lives, breathes, or even exists does so because of light. To understand the world is not to measure it mechanically, but to awaken to its illumination, to see that all being is gradations of radiance flowing from the divine source. In this philosophy, knowledge itself is light, and ignorance is darkness. True understanding cannot be gained only by reasoning or logic. It must be experienced directly as a kind of inner illumination where the soul perceives reality with a brilliance beyond words. Suhrawardi believed that every human being carries within them a spark of that eternal light, and the spiritual journey is the return of that spark to its origin. Meditation, contemplation, and purity of heart become ways of polishing the soul so it can reflect the light without distortion. Suhrawardi's philosophy blurs the boundary between philosophy and mysticism. It calls upon seekers to rise beyond mere argument and step into vision, to realize that truth is not only thought, but also seen, felt, and lived. The cosmos itself becomes a temple of radiance, every star a symbol, every moment a flicker of the eternal flame. To embrace his teaching is to remember that life is not simply survival in a darkened world, but a pilgrimage back to the light that has always been our origin and our home. Avicennian philosophy. Avicennian philosophy is the grand synthesis of reason and faith, a luminous vision crafted by the Persian genius Ibn Sina, known in the West as Avicenna. It stands at the crossroads of Greek thought and Islamic wisdom, weaving Aristotle's logic and Plato's ideals into a vast system that sought to explain the mysteries of existence, the soul, and the divine. Avicenna believed the human mind was capable of reaching extraordinary heights, that by refining thought and seeking knowledge, one could glimpse the eternal truths hidden beneath the veil of appearances. At the heart of his philosophy lies the distinction between essence and existence. Essence is what a thing is. Existence is that it is. A rose has the essence of being a rose, but whether it exists in the world depends on something greater than itself. This led Avicenna to the idea of the necessary being, God, as the source that gives existence to all essences. From this flowed his vision of a cosmos ordered in layers of emanation, each level streaming from the divine like light, cascading from the sun. Avicenna also probed the mystery of the soul with piercing depth. He argued that the soul is immaterial and immortal, proven by his floating man thought experiment. Imagine a man created fully formed, suspended in air with no contact with the world, yet he would still be aware of himself. Consciousness, Avicenna declared, is undeniable proof of the soul's independence from the body. Avicennian philosophy burns with both reason and wonder. It insists that human thought is not bound to earth but capable of touching eternity, that through the pursuit of knowledge, the soul ascends toward the radiant truth of the divine. Sufi mystical philosophy. Sufi mystical philosophy is the path of the heart, a journey that moves beyond rituals and doctrines to seek direct union with the divine. It teaches that God is not a distant ruler to be feared, but the beloved to be yearned for, longed for, and ultimately embraced. To the Sufi, the soul is a lover wandering through the deserts of existence, restless and thirsty until it discovers that the one it searches for has always been within. Every breath, every heartbeat becomes a step closer to dissolving the illusion of separation and awakening to the truth of divine unity. The Sufis speak of the fana, the annihilation of the ego, the melting away of self in the fire of love. This is not death but rebirth, the moment when the self's boundaries dissolve and only the divine remains. Through poetry, music, and dance, they express what words cannot capture, the ecstasy of becoming one with infinite love. The whirling dervish spins not to entertain, but to embody the movement of the cosmos, the turning of the soul around its beloved. The poems of Rumi and Hafiz still burn with this longing, igniting hearts centuries later. Sufism teaches that the path to God is not through fear, but through love, humility, and surrender. The world's beauty is not a distraction, but a mirror reflecting the radiance of the Creator. Every human being, no matter how flawed, carries within them a spark of this divine light. Sufi mystical philosophy is a call to fall in love with existence itself, to see the sacred in every face, and to allow the heart to be broken open until it can hold the infinite. Baha'i precursors. The precursors of the Baha'i faith rise from the soil of 19th century Persia, where centuries of longing for renewal and justice erupted into radical visions of faith. Before the Baha'i faith took form, there was the Bab, a young merchant from Shiraz whose words ignited hearts like wildfire. He proclaimed that a new age was dawning, that truth was not buried in the past, but breaking into the present with unstoppable force. His message was both tender and dangerous, calling for purity, unity, and transformation, while defying the rigid clerics and monarchs who clung to power. For his followers, known as Babis, his teachings became a fire that burned brighter with every act of persecution, every drop of blood shed. But even before the Bab's voice echoed, there had been undercurrents stirring in Persian thought, movements and seekers who questioned blind tradition and longed for a revelation that could heal a fractured world. Millenarian expectations filled the air, whispers of a coming figure who would unify faiths, break the chains of oppression, and reveal a deeper harmony between heaven and earth. The atmosphere was electric, a restless waiting that primed hearts to embrace a vision larger than sect, larger than empire. These precursors carried seeds that would blossom into the Baha'i faith, where unity of humanity and oneness of religion became guiding stars. In their struggles, one sees the raw yearning of a people for light in an age of darkness, the daring hope that beyond all divisions there could come a message vast enough to bind nations and tender enough to heal the soul. Ancient Egyptian Mat. Ancient Egyptian Mat is the philosophy of truth, balance, and cosmic order, a principle so sacred that it was said to hold the entire universe together. To the Egyptians, Mat was not just an idea, but a goddess, the living embodiment of harmony, who governed both the movement of the stars and the justice of human society. Mat was the heartbeat of existence, ensuring that the sun rose, the Nile flooded, and the world remained in balance. Without her, chaos, known as Isfet, would swallow creation. For the people of Egypt, to live according to Mat meant to live with integrity, fairness, and respect for the natural and divine order. Every action, every word carried weight, for at death the soul was judged against the feather of Mat. If one's heart was heavy with lies, greed, or cruelty, it would fail the test, and the soul would be devoured by Ammit, the devourer of the dead. But if the heart was light, aligned with truth and justice, the soul would pass into eternal life. Ma'at was not reserved for kings and priests alone. It flowed through the daily lives of farmers, builders, and families. To deal honestly, to show kindness, to act with humility, was to uphold Ma'at. Even pharaohs, with all their power, were bound by her law. For a ruler who abandoned Ma'at invited chaos upon the land. Ancient Egyptian Mat is the reminder that life is more than survival or ambition. It is alignment with a deeper order, a cosmic balance that binds human hearts to the rhythm of the stars. To walk in Mat is to live in truth, where harmony becomes destiny. Egyptian funerary wisdom texts. Egyptian funerary wisdom texts are the echoes of eternity, sacred writings carved on tomb walls and papyrus scrolls to guide the soul through the perilous journey of death into the afterlife. These texts, spells, prayers, and instructions were not mere superstition, but a profound philosophy of existence, declaring that life continues beyond the grave and that one's deeds shape the soul's eternal fate. They whisper of a cosmos where every heart will be weighed against the feather of Ma'at, the principle of truth and justice, and where no lie, no cruelty, no hidden sin can escape the scales. The pyramid texts, the coffin texts, and later the Book of the Dead were more than funerary manuals. They were blueprints of moral and spiritual survival. They taught that the soul, the Ba, must navigate the Duat, a realm of trials, gates, and guardians. Words carry divine power, and the right incantation, spoken with purity, could open the way where otherwise there would be darkness. But no spell could save a heart heavy with corruption. For the Egyptians, wisdom was not in denial of death, but in preparation for it, shaping one's life so that the soul might stand unafraid before Osiris and the divine tribunal. These texts reveal a haunting truth, that every action leaves a trace, and that eternity itself bends toward justice. They are not just guides for the dead, but warnings for the living, that life must be lived with integrity, for in the silent halls of judgment, only truth endures. Egyptian funerary wisdom texts remain a testament to humanity's oldest yearning, that death is not the end, but a passage into the light of eternity. African Ubuntu. Ubuntu is a philosophy that pulses at the heart of African wisdom, a vision of life that declares, I am because we are. It is not just an idea, but a way of being, a reminder that the self is never an isolated island, but a thread woven into the vast fabric of humanity. Where modern thought often celebrates independence and separation, Ubuntu insists that true existence is found in relationship. in the warmth of connection, in the dignity of shared humanity, in the sacred bond that ties each soul to the whole. Ubuntu teaches that every act ripples outward. A word of kindness strengthens the community, while cruelty or greed wounds not just one but all. To harm another is to harm oneself. To uplift another is to rise together. It dismantles the illusion of me versus you and replaces it with the deeper truth that our lives are interdependent, our joys and sorrows inseparable. In the villages and councils of Africa, Ubuntu was not abstract but lived. Decisions were made through consensus, justice was sought with reconciliation, and the measure of wealth was not possessions but the strength of communal bonds. This philosophy is not naive, for it does not deny suffering or conflict. Instead, it offers a way through, by recognizing the humanity even in the enemy, by choosing forgiveness over vengeance, by seeing that healing can only come when dignity is restored to all. Ubuntu is a fire against the coldness of isolation, a voice that says we do not exist to dominate, but to belong. It is the heartbeat of a wisdom that makes life meaningful only when it is shared. Ife philosophy. Ife philosophy is the ancient wisdom tradition of the Yoruba people, a living system that weaves divination, spirituality, and ethics into a vision of harmony between humanity, nature, and the divine. At its heart lies the belief that every soul comes into the world with a unique destiny, a path chosen before birth that shapes the journey of life. To walk in Ifa is to seek alignment with that destiny, to discover the purpose hidden within trials and triumphs, and to live in balance with the forces of the universe. The wisdom of Ifa is carried in the Odu Ifa, a vast oral scripture composed of sacred verses, myths, and teachings. Through divination, guided by the Babalawo, the priest of Ifa, the seeker finds counsel, not through dogma, but through stories layered with meaning. These stories reveal that life is not random, but patterned, and that every difficulty hides a lesson, every choice carries consequence, and every person has the power to return to alignment with their destiny. Central to Ifa is the understanding of Ash, the divine energy that flows through all things. Ash is creation itself, the breath of life, the force of change, the power that allows words, actions, and intentions to shape reality. To live in Ifa is to respect this sacred current, to honor ancestors, to walk with reverence toward the earth, and to recognize the spiritual connection between all beings. Ifa philosophy is not about escape from the world, but deep immersion in it. It teaches that wisdom is listening to the earth, to spirit, to the echoes of ancestors, until one discovers the rhythm of destiny and moves with it like a dancer in harmony with the drumbeat of existence. Akan philosophy. Akan philosophy rises from the wisdom traditions of West Africa, carrying the heartbeat of a people who see life as woven together in a sacred web of community, spirit, and destiny. At its center is the belief in Okra, the soul or divine spark each person carries, bestowed by the Creator before birth. This inner essence gives every human being dignity and purpose, a reminder that no life is without meaning. The Akan view existence as a journey of the soul, moving between the seen and unseen worlds, forever bound to the ancestors who guide and protect. Community is the lifeblood of Akan thought. The individual does not stand alone, but exists as part of a larger whole, bound by kinship, responsibility, and shared destiny. To live well is to live in harmony with others, to honor obligations, to nurture balance, and to embody compassion. The proverb, "I am because we are, and since we are, therefore I am," echoes through their worldview, affirming that identity is shaped not by isolation but by belonging. Akan philosophy is also deeply moral. It emphasizes justice, respect, and truth, teaching that character, Suban, is the measure of a person. Wisdom is preserved in proverbs, stories, and rituals, reminding each generation that life is a sacred trust, not to be wasted on selfishness or dishonor. In its essence, a Khan philosophy stirs the soul with the reminder that we are both eternal and earthly, both individuals and part of a living community that stretches across time. It is the call to walk with dignity, guided by the ancestors, carrying the flame of spirit in a world that is bound together by love and responsibility. Ma'atian ethics. Ma'atian ethics is the heartbeat of ancient Egyptian philosophy, a moral vision rooted in Ma'at, the goddess and principle of truth, justice, balance, and cosmic order. To the Egyptians, Ma'at was not simply a divine figure, but the very fabric of existence, the harmony that held the heavens, the earth, and human society together. To live by Ma'at was to live in alignment with the universe itself, to walk a path of honesty, compassion, fairness, and responsibility. The essence of Ma'atian ethics was captured in the concept of the weighing of the heart. At death, the soul's heart was placed on scales opposite the feather of Ma'at. If the heart was heavy with lies, greed, or cruelty, it condemned the soul to destruction. If it was light, pure, and true, the soul gained eternal life among the blessed. This was not just ritual imagery, it was a philosophy that infused daily existence with sacred accountability. Every word spoken, every decision made, every act toward another human being carried cosmic weight. The negative confession, a series of declarations found in the Book of the Dead, reveals this ethical system in action. The deceased would affirm, "I have not stolen, I have not killed, I have not lied, I have not caused suffering." These words were not only for the afterlife, but for the living, a constant reminder that morality was the key to harmony both on earth and beyond. Ma'atian ethics stands as one of the earliest philosophies of universal justice, declaring that truth is eternal and that balance sustains all things. It urges humanity to live with integrity, for in the eyes of Ma'at, no deceit survives, and only the heart aligned with truth may endure forever. Ethiopian wisdom traditions. Ethiopian wisdom traditions are a tapestry of ancient insight, woven from the chants of priests, the parables of sages, and the lived rhythms of a people who saw philosophy not as abstraction, but as guidance for the soul. Rooted in a land where Christianity took deep root early, these traditions blend scripture with oral storytelling, proverbs with parables, creating a worldview that is at once spiritual, ethical, and deeply human. They whisper that wisdom is not locked in books alone, but spoken at the hearth, sung in hymns, and carried in the memory of generations. The Ethiopian Book of the Wise Philosophers stands as one of the shining testaments of this heritage, gathering sayings from Greek, Coptic, and local sources into a treasury of moral reflection. Its lessons urge humility, justice, reverence for God, and respect for community. Proverbs, passed from mouth to mouth across centuries, capture truths in sharp images, that patience is stronger than anger, that arrogance blinds, that community is the soil where the individual takes root. Wisdom here is practical and poetic, meant to guide farmers, kings, and children alike. This tradition also carries a profound sense of spiritual resilience. In times of famine, invasion, and struggle, Ethiopian wisdom turned suffering into lessons of endurance and faith. It taught that hardship could refine character, that trials were teachers, and that the soul's dignity mattered more than worldly wealth. Ethiopian wisdom traditions burn with a quiet flame, reminding us that philosophy is not always found in academies or palaces. Sometimes it lives in the simple words of elders, in parables that echo through time, in the conviction that truth is not owned but shared, a gift meant to keep humanity upright through every storm. Pre-Socratic naturalism. Pre-Socratic naturalism is the dawn of philosophy, the moment when human beings first turned from myth to reason in search of truth about the cosmos. Before Socrates, these early thinkers stood at the edge of mystery and dared to ask, what is the world made of? What lies behind the endless flux of nature? They looked not to gods or rituals for answers, but to the elements themselves, earth, air, fire, and water, and to the hidden order that binds them together. Thales gazed at the sea and declared that all things spring from water, the source of life and change. Anaximenes breathed the air and called it the eternal substance, invisible, yet present in every living thing. Heraclitus watched the flames and saw the world as fire, ever-changing, where stability is nothing but illusion. Empedocles spoke of four roots, earth, air, fire, and water, woven together by love and torn apart by strife. Democritus imagined atoms, indivisible and eternal, colliding in the void to form the universe itself. These early philosophers stripped the world of divine whim and replaced it with law, pattern, and necessity. They believed nature could be understood, that it followed principles rather than chaos, that beneath the storm of appearances lay an order waiting to be uncovered. Pre-Socratic naturalism is the birth cry of human curiosity, the spark that ignited science and philosophy alike. It is the reminder that wonder begins with looking at the sky, the river, the earth beneath our feet, and daring to ask, what is this? Where did it come from? And what secret laws keep the universe alive? Heraclitean flux doctrine. The Heraclitean flux doctrine is the philosophy of fire and change, a vision of the world as a river that never stands still. Heraclitus of Ephesus declared that everything flows, that nothing remains the same, even for a single heartbeat. You cannot step into the same river twice, he said, for the waters are always moving, reshaping, dissolving, becoming new. This was not a poetic metaphor, but a radical truth, that permanence is an illusion, and the essence of existence is transformation. Heraclitus saw the cosmos not as chaos, but as a living fire, burning and renewing itself in eternal rhythm. Conflict, which others feared, he embraced as the engine of creation. War and strife were not signs of disorder, but of harmony, hidden intention, like the strings of a bow drawn taut to produce music. For him, opposites were not enemies but partners, life and death, joy and sorrow, day and night, all dancing together in a balance that keeps the universe alive. This doctrine unsettles because it strips away the comfort of stability. Everything we cling to, youth, health, relationships, even identity, is in constant motion, slipping through our fingers. Yet within that truth is a fierce beauty. To see the world as flux is to awaken to its living pulse, to honor each moment as unrepeatable, to understand that life is precious because it is always vanishing. The Heraclitean flux doctrine is not a call to despair but to awareness. It asks us to stop grasping for permanence and instead flow with change, to see fire not as destruction but as the eternal dance of becoming, where everything is born, burns, and transforms anew. Atomism. Atomism is the philosophy of hidden foundations, a daring vision from ancient Greece that sought to explain the universe not through myth or divine whim, but through the movement of invisible particles. Leucippus and Democritus declared that everything, stars, mountains, souls, and even gods, was built from atoms, eternal and indivisible, colliding and combining in the endless void. To them, the world was not chaos, but a great dance of matter, unfolding without need of supernatural command. It was a philosophy that stripped existence to its core, unveiling a cosmos governed by necessity and chance rather than fate or divine punishment. This vision was both liberating and unsettling. If all things are made of atoms, then death is not a descent into eternal torment, but the dissolution of matter, the scattering of particles into new forms. The soul itself, they taught, was woven of fine atoms, dissolving back into nature when life ended. fear of the afterlife, the terrors of gods and judgment were illusions, phantoms conjured by ignorance. Atomism shattered those fears, offering instead a vision of peace. Life is brief, but it is ours to live without trembling. Though condemned by many as impious, atomism lit the spark that centuries later would echo in science. It replaced superstition with curiosity, urging the human mind to look deeper, to search for causes hidden beneath appearances. In its stark simplicity lies a profound truth, that the vastness of existence is built from the smallest of things, that beneath all variety lies unity, and that every storm, every star, every heartbeat is the motion of atoms endlessly weaving the fabric of reality. Empedoclean Four Roots. The philosophy of Empedocles strikes with elemental force, a vision that sought to explain the cosmos not with myths of gods alone, but with the very substances that shape existence. He taught that all things are composed of four eternal roots: earth, air, fire, and water, woven together in endless combinations. These roots do not perish, they do not vanish. Instead, they blend and separate, giving birth to mountains and oceans, bodies and souls, love and strife. Life, he declared, is the great dance of these forces, creation and destruction locked in eternal embrace. Empedocles saw love as the power that draws the roots together, binding them into harmony, while strife tears them apart, scattering them into chaos. The cosmos itself breathes through this rhythm, expanding and contracting, building worlds and then unraveling them, only to begin again. To him, existence was not random but cyclical, an eternal heartbeat where unity and division alternate without end. Yet his philosophy is not only cosmology, it is also myth, mystery, and moral warning. Empedocles claimed that the soul, too, is bound to this cosmic law, wandering through countless lives as punishment for its ancient crimes, reincarnating through plants, animals, and humans until purified enough to return to the divine. He believed himself once a bird, a fish, even a god, and taught that every act of cruelty deepens exile, while every act of compassion brings us closer to release. The Four Roots remind us that beneath the shifting shapes of the world lies a timeless order, that love and strife shape not only the stars, but our own lives, and that within the elements we may glimpse eternity itself. Anaxagoras nous. Anaxagoras nous is the philosophy of cosmic mind, the daring belief that behind the swirling chaos of matter there exists an infinite intelligence that orders all things. In a world where philosophers search for the one element, water, air, fire, or earth, that gave birth to existence, Anaxagoras shattered the pattern by declaring that the universe could not be explained by matter alone. He envisioned nous, the mind, as a boundless, pure, and all-powerful force, distinct from the physical world, yet capable of moving and arranging it with purpose. To him, the cosmos was not random, not a blind collision of particles, but a living order set into motion by nous. Every star, every planet, every seed growing in the soil was part of a design shaped by this great intelligence. He argued that all things are made up of infinite tiny particles, each containing fragments of everything else. Yet, it was nous that separated, arranged, and gave them form. Without it, matter would remain a formless mixture. With it, the universe came alive. Anaxagoras' teaching ignited awe and controversy alike. To say that the sun was not a god, but a blazing stone, or that the moon was made of earth, was radical enough, but to insist that the cosmos itself was guided by a vast intelligence opened a new horizon. Anaxagoras' nous is the whisper that order exists in the seeming chaos, that mind and reason are not accidents, but woven into the very fabric of reality. It is the conviction that behind the shifting of clouds and the turning of galaxies, there is thought, there is purpose, there is an eternal mind at work. Eleusinian Mysteries. The Eleusinian Mysteries were the sacred rites of ancient Greece, shrouded in secrecy, trembling with awe, and said to reveal truths so profound that those who experienced them no longer feared death. Centered around the myth of Demeter and Persephone, they told the story of loss, descent, and return, of a daughter stolen into the underworld, of a mother's grief that withered the earth, and of reunion that brought back the spring. To the initiates, this myth was not just a tale, but a mirror of the human soul, its suffering, its descent into darkness, and its promise of renewal. The ceremonies at Eleusis were hidden from the uninitiated, but whispers of them tell of purification, fasting, sacred drink, and visions that tore open the veil between life and eternity. Those who walked the path were said to witness a revelation so luminous that it transformed the way they lived and died. The mysteries taught that death was not the end, but a passage, that the soul, like Persephone, journeys into shadow only to rise again into light. What made the Eleusinian mysteries so powerful was not dogma, but experience. They did not preach, they initiated. They plunged the seeker into silence, into ritual, into the trembling unknown, until the ordinary world dissolved and a deeper truth emerged. For centuries, kings and peasants alike sought initiation, not for power, not for wealth, but for hope, the hope that beyond the grave there is life, beyond loss there is return, beyond suffering there is renewal. The Eleusinian mysteries whispered to humanity's deepest fear and answered with a vision of immortality clothed in myth, beauty, and eternal promise. Orphism. Orphism is the philosophy of rebirth, a mystical tradition of ancient Greece that wove music, myth, and ritual into a vision of the soul's eternal journey. Rooted in the teachings of the legendary poet Orpheus, it declared that human life is not a single thread, but part of an endless cycle of death and rebirth, bound by the weight of one's deeds. At its heart lay a haunting belief: the soul is divine in origin, yet trapped in the prison of the body, condemned to wander until it is purified and reunited with the eternal. The Orphics taught that existence is marked by duality, spirit yearning for freedom, flesh pulling it toward desire. Through ritual, ascetic practice, and sacred hymns, followers sought to cleanse the soul of its burdens. They believed in strict purity, in reverence for the gods, in the sacredness of life, and in the transformative power of song. Orpheus himself embodied this power, his music so pure that it could tame beasts, move stones, and soften the heart of Hades. His descent into the underworld in search of Eurydice symbolized the soul's longing for release, its desperate struggle to reclaim what was lost to death. Central to Orphism was the myth of Dionysus Zagreus, torn apart by the Titans and reborn, a divine drama mirrored in the human soul's cycle of suffering and renewal. To the Orphics, salvation meant liberation from this endless wheel, achieved through purity, reverence, and the cultivation of divine wisdom. Orphism is a hymn of yearning, a philosophy that calls the soul to remember its celestial origin, to endure the trials of the flesh, and to sing its way back to the eternal harmony from which it came. Mystery religions of Greece and Rome. The mystery religions of Greece and Rome shimmered with secrecy, promising truths that could not be spoken aloud, only lived through initiation. In a world filled with public temples and civic rituals, these cults whispered of hidden knowledge, salvation beyond death, and a closeness to the divine that ordinary worship could never grant. They were mysteries because their rites were veiled, known only to the initiated, forbidden to outsiders, yet their influence seeped into the hearts of those who longed for more than the cold duties of state religion. The Eleusinian mysteries celebrated the story of Demeter and Persephone, revealing through sacred ritual the cycle of death and rebirth, a hope that the soul too could rise again. The cult of Dionysus brought ecstasy, dissolving the boundaries of self in a frenzy of wine, dance, and liberation, where mortals touch the divine through intoxication and madness. Mithraism, beloved by Roman soldiers, wrapped its initiates in symbols of cosmic struggle, the slaying of the bull, and the promise of victory over darkness. The cult of Isis spread across the empire, offering comfort through the image of the Divine Mother who protected and healed her children. These religions thrived because they addressed what official rituals ignored: the hunger for personal transformation, the terror of death, the longing for intimacy with gods who seemed distant and cold. Their initiations were not spectacles for the crowd, but inward journeys where the initiate was symbolically buried and reborn, touched by a secret too powerful for words. The mystery religions were not philosophy in books, but philosophy in experience, a trembling step into the unknown, a promise that beneath the veil of this world there were hidden doors into eternity. Eudaimonism. Eudaimonism is the ancient philosophy of flourishing, a vision that insists the true purpose of life is not mere survival, not the fleeting pursuit of pleasure, but the cultivation of a soul that thrives in harmony with virtue. The Greek word eudaimonia is often translated as happiness, but it is something deeper, an enduring state of fulfillment that comes when one lives in accordance with reason, integrity, and excellence. To the Greeks, this was not a passive gift from fortune, but an achievement, the highest calling of a human life. Aristotle declared that every being has a natural end, a purpose written into its essence. For humans, that purpose is the exercise of reason and the practice of virtue. Courage, temperance, justice, and wisdom are not abstract ideals, but living forces that shape the soul. The one who lives by these virtues becomes like a well-tuned instrument, resonating with clarity and balance, creating a harmony that cannot be shaken by external storms. Wealth, health, and status may come and go, but they cannot touch the inner flourishing of a virtuous soul. Eudaimonism does not deny pleasure or material goods, but it places them in their proper place, as tools, not masters. To chase them endlessly is to remain enslaved by desire, but to live with virtue is to rise above, to taste the freedom of a life well ordered. What makes eudaimonism so stirring is its demand for greatness, not greatness in power, but greatness in character. It calls the soul to rise above mediocrity, to choose the harder right over the easier wrong, to live in such a way that every action becomes a step toward a life of depth, dignity, and lasting fulfillment. Roman civic philosophy. Roman civic philosophy is the creed of duty, a worldview that placed the survival of the republic and the strength of community above the desires of the individual. It taught that the greatness of Rome did not rest on wealth or conquest alone, but on the unshakable loyalty of its citizens to shared laws, traditions, and responsibilities. To the Roman mind, freedom was not licensed to do as one pleased, but the privilege earned by fulfilling obligations, serving the state, honoring the gods, defending the family, and upholding justice. The soul of Rome was not in the power of emperors, but in the virtues of its people, bound together by discipline and sacrifice. This philosophy praised pietas, devotion to family, faith, and fatherland; gravitas, the seriousness to act with dignity and purpose; and virtus, the courage to fight and die for the common good. A Roman citizen was expected to see themselves not as an isolated individual, but as part of an unbroken chain, carrying the weight of ancestors and the hopes of descendants. To neglect this duty was to fracture the harmony of the state, to dishonor the very essence of Roman identity. Civic philosophy demanded service through military valor, political responsibility, or the simple labor of building and sustaining the city. It saw law as sacred, order as divine, and the republic as the vessel through which human greatness could endure. Even emperors, cloaked in power, were reminded that their legitimacy came from serving the collective, not themselves. Roman civic philosophy is the stern heartbeat of a civilization that believed immortality was achieved not through personal indulgence, but through legacy, the memory of a life lived in loyalty to something greater than the self. Cicero's humanism. Cicero's humanism is the cry of a statesman and philosopher who believed that the dignity of man rests not in power or conquest, but in reason, virtue, and the shared bonds of community. Living in the crumbling twilight of the Roman Republic, he sought to remind his fellow citizens that greatness was not measured by wealth or military triumph, but by moral character and the pursuit of justice. He believed that the gift distinguishing humanity from beasts was ratio, the capacity for reason, which allows us to recognize truth, discern right from wrong, and rise above the pull of base desire. Cicero envisioned human beings as bound together by societas, a natural fellowship rooted in justice and mutual respect. To him, laws were not arbitrary decrees, but reflections of a higher moral order, a law written into nature itself, discoverable through reason. Thus, no tyrant's command could erase the truth of justice, and no empire's fall could destroy the dignity of virtue. Human life, he insisted, is sacred when lived in accordance with this natural law, for it is then that man fulfills his highest potential. But Cicero's humanism was not merely abstract. It was passionate, urgent, born of a man who watched his republic collapse under greed and ambition. He warned that a society without virtue, no matter its wealth or power, was doomed to ruin. For him, philosophy was not a retreat from politics, but its very foundation, the moral compass without which governance becomes tyranny. Cicero's humanism is a reminder that to be human is to live responsibly, guided by truth, justice, and reason, and that in preserving these, we preserve the very essence of our shared humanity. Marcus Aurelius' Meditations. Marcus Aurelius's Meditations is not a grand treatise meant for others, but a private journal of a man struggling to master himself while carrying the weight of an empire. It is the voice of a Roman emperor whispering to his own soul in the silence of the night, reminding himself of truths he could so easily forget amid power, war, and responsibility. In these pages, he confronts the fleeting nature of life, the pettiness of human ambition, and the storms of emotion that threaten to pull the mind into chaos. For Marcus, Stoicism was not theory, it was survival. He wrote that the world is change, that everything dissolves, and that clinging to permanence is the root of suffering. He urged himself to accept death not as a tragedy, but as the natural conclusion of life, as ordinary as leaves falling in autumn. He reminded himself that the cruelty and ignorance of others do not wound the soul unless we let them, that anger only poisons the one who carries it, and that true strength lies in keeping the mind calm while the world burns. His meditations pulse with humility. Though emperor of Rome, he confessed that glory is hollow, that wealth and power fade into dust, and that only virtue endures. Each entry is a battle cry against despair, a call to return again and again to reason, justice, courage, and self-control. The Meditations is the diary of a man who refused to be ruled by fear, by vanity, by rage. It is the reminder that even at the pinnacle of power, the greatest victory is not over nations, but over the restless storms within the self. Seneca's Stoic Ethics. Seneca's Stoic ethics burns with urgency, for he wrote not as a detached philosopher, but as a man surrounded by power, wealth, and looming death. His words pulse with the reminder that life is brief, fragile, and slipping through our hands even as we waste it in distraction. He declared that the greatest tragedy is not that we die, but that we never truly live, that we squander our days in worry, greed, and empty pursuits while ignoring the simple treasures already before us. At the heart of Seneca's thought is the Stoic conviction that happiness is found not in external fortune but in the mastery of the self. Fate may strike with illness, betrayal, or loss, but virtue, the courage to act justly, the wisdom to see clearly, the temperance to resist excess, the strength to endure, remains within our control. He urged his readers to remember that wealth and status are fragile illusions, that death is always near, and that freedom belongs only to the one who learns to desire nothing except what the soul can give itself. His writings are sharp, almost severe, but they carry a strange comfort. Seneca reminds us that every fear loses power when confronted directly, that every grief becomes lighter when seen through the lens of nature's cycles. To meditate on mortality is not despair but liberation, for it compels us to live with intensity, to value each breath, to act with integrity. Seneca's Stoic ethics is a philosophy of steel and fire, a call to strip away the noise of life until only what matters remains, virtue, clarity, and the unshakable peace of a soul that has learned to stand unafraid before the inevitability of death. Epictetus Discourses. Epictetus' discourses are the voice of resilience, words born not from privilege or power, but from the chains of slavery, transformed into lessons of unbreakable freedom. Epictetus taught that the world outside us is not ours to control. Fate, fortune, loss, betrayal, even death itself, these belong to the realm of what is beyond our command. But within us lies the citadel of choice, the power to decide how we interpret, endure, and respond. True freedom, he declared, is not escape from hardship, but mastery over the mind, the refusal to let external events dictate the state of the soul. He spoke with a bluntness that pierced through illusions. When someone insults you, it is not their words that harm you, but the judgment you attach to them. When you suffer loss, it is not the loss itself that destroys you, but your clinging to what was never fully yours. The discourses are a relentless reminder that everything we treasure, health, wealth, reputation, even the love of others, is on loan from the universe and can be taken at any moment. To resist this truth is to suffer. To accept it is to be unshaken. Epictetus did not preach detachment as coldness, but as clarity. He urged his students to love deeply, to serve with honor, but never to confuse what is fragile with what is eternal. The only possession truly ours is the will, the ability to choose virtue over vice, reason over impulse, courage over despair. The discourses burn with urgency, teaching that while the world may strip you of everything, it cannot take your mind unless you surrender it. In that realization lies a freedom no tyrant can touch, a sovereignty no fate can undo. Roman Skepticism. Roman skepticism is the philosophy of doubt sharpened into wisdom, a tradition that looked upon the flood of competing doctrines and chose to withhold judgment rather than drown in false certainty. It drew its strength from the Greek skeptics, but found new voice in Rome, where philosophers like Cicero wrestled with uncertainty not as weakness, but as liberation. The skeptics saw that for every argument, there is a counter-argument, equally persuasive, equally fragile. To cling too tightly to one side is to risk arrogance and error. To suspend judgment is to taste a strange kind of freedom. This suspension of judgment, epoche, was not paralysis, but serenity. By refusing to declare what cannot be known with certainty, the skeptic found tranquility where dogmatists found endless conflict. In a world where politics crumbled, empires shifted, and philosophies fought bitterly for dominance, skepticism offered the quiet refuge of the open mind. It whispered, "Do not be enslaved by doctrines. Do not be dragged by rigid beliefs into turmoil. Wait, observe, question, and live without the burden of absolute claims." Cicero, though not a strict skeptic, carried its spirit into Roman thought. He used skeptical inquiry to cut through superstition, to question blind obedience, and to remind his peers that wisdom lies not in pretending to know everything, but in recognizing the limits of knowledge. In this recognition, humility is born, and with humility comes peace. Roman skepticism is not the despair of knowing nothing, but the calm strength of refusing illusion. It is the art of stepping back from the noise of certainty, choosing instead to dwell in the quiet space where truth is sought, but never forced, where the soul rests in questioning and finds its freedom there. Neo-Stoicism. Neo-Stoicism is the philosophy of endurance reborn, a revival of ancient Stoic wisdom fused with the fire of Christian faith during the turbulence of the Renaissance. In a world torn by war, betrayal, and shifting empires, Neo-Stoicism rose as a guide for those who sought to master their passions while still honoring the God who ruled the universe. It declared that human beings, though shaken by fortune's storms, could remain unbroken if they learned to govern their desires, tame their emotions, and anchor themselves in virtue. Justus Lipsius, the great voice of Neo-Stoicism, urged people to live with constancy, a steadfastness of spirit that no disaster could uproot. He taught that grief, anger, fear, and longing are tempests that strip the mind of peace, but through discipline, prayer, and reflection, they can be subdued. Unlike the Stoics of old, who saw the universe as governed by impersonal reason, Neo-Stoicism proclaimed that this order was the will of God and that surrendering to it was not defeat, but liberation. The Neo-Stoic does not cling to wealth or status, knowing how swiftly they fade. He does not rage against suffering, but accepts it as a trial, a fire that tests and purifies the soul. In a world filled with treachery and cruelty, Neo-Stoicism taught that dignity lies not in controlling what happens, but in mastering how one responds. This philosophy became a shield for soldiers, rulers, and thinkers alike, a reminder that even in the darkest hours, serenity can be found. Neo-Stoicism whispers that peace is not the absence of pain, but the strength to endure it, standing firm when everything else is crumbling. Roman Epicureanism. Roman Epicureanism carried the quiet fire of Epicurus into the heart of an empire obsessed with conquest, wealth, and glory. While senators plotted, soldiers marched, and emperors sought immortality in monuments, the Epicureans whispered a different truth. Happiness does not live in power or riches, but in simplicity, friendship, and freedom from fear. They offered an antidote to the chaos of Roman ambition, a life stripped of needless desire, rooted instead in the gentle pursuit of tranquility. Lucretius, the great Roman poet-philosopher, poured Epicurean wisdom into his masterpiece, On the Nature of Things. In verses both beautiful and unsettling, he declared that the universe is made of atoms and void, that the gods do not intervene in human affairs, and that death is not a punishment but a dissolution into nothingness. Death is nothing to us, he proclaimed, for when we live, death is not present, and when death comes, we no longer exist. These words were meant to tear down the fear of the grave, freeing the soul to savor the sweetness of life without terror. Roman Epicureanism rejected the hunger for fame and excess, warning that such pursuits chained men to endless anxiety. True joy, it taught, was found in bread, water, a quiet garden, and the company of loyal friends. It was a philosophy of moderation, not indulgence, choosing a calm mind over luxury, inner freedom over external success. In the clamor of empire, Roman Epicureanism was a quiet rebellion. It invited the restless to lay down their ambitions, to shed the illusions of power, and to discover that peace had always been close at hand, in simplicity, in reason, and in the gentle bonds of friendship. Roman natural law philosophy. Roman natural law philosophy is the belief that beneath every written law and political decree lies a deeper order, a law not made by men, but woven into the fabric of the universe itself. The Romans held that justice is not created by rulers or assemblies but discovered, for it exists in nature, eternal and unchanging. This law, born from reason, was seen as common to all people, transcending borders, tribes, and empires. It was a radical idea in its time that a slave and a senator, a Roman and a foreigner, were all bound by the same universal principles of right and wrong. Cicero gave voice to this vision, declaring that true law is right reason in agreement with nature, constant and everlasting, unalterable by decree, and unshaken by time. No senate could repeal it, no emperor could override it, for it is written not on tablets of stone, but in the hearts of human beings. To live in harmony with this law was to live in accordance with nature itself, to align personal conduct with a justice that transcends ambition, greed, and the corruption of politics. Roman natural law was not abstract speculation. It was the seed that shaped legal systems for centuries to come. It demanded that rulers govern not by whim, but by principles, that citizens respect not just the commands of power, but the eternal order that made those commands just. It inspired the belief that there are rights no authority can strip away, duties no ruler can abolish, and truths no passage of time can erase. This philosophy endures as the Roman conviction that law is not invention but discovery, a mirror of the eternal justice that binds all humanity under one universal order. Roman Republican virtue. Roman Republican virtue was the lifeblood of a people who believed that greatness did not rest in kings or tyrants, but in the collective strength of citizens bound by duty, honor, and sacrifice. It was not an abstract code, but a way of life, forged in the fierce conviction that the Republic survived only when individuals placed the common good above private ambition. At its heart stood the ideals of virtus, courage and moral excellence, pietas, devotion to family, gods, and country, gravitas, seriousness and self-discipline, and fides, the sacred trust that bound citizens together. In the days of the Republic, a Roman was measured not by wealth, but by service, by the willingness to shoulder responsibility in war and in peace. The farmer soldier who left his fields to defend the city embodied this ideal, as did leaders who resisted the temptation of power for personal gain. The legend of Cincinnatus, who abandoned his plow to serve as dictator only to lay down power once the crisis had passed, became a model of humility and civic devotion. This virtue was not gentle, for it demanded harsh sacrifice. Sons marched to war, families endured hardship, and ambition was curbed for the sake of stability. Yet it bound Rome together, creating a republic that stood as an ideal of shared responsibility and discipline. Roman Republican virtue shines as a reminder that freedom is not sustained by indulgence or apathy, but by the vigilance of citizens who are willing to give of themselves for something greater. It is the echo of a world where duty outweighed desire, and the survival of the Republic was the highest honor a man could claim. Babylonian wisdom literature. Babylonian wisdom literature is the voice of one of the world's earliest civilizations, carved into clay tablets, echoing across millennia with lessons about justice, humility, and the fragile nature of human life. These writings, proverbs, dialogues, poems, and laments, were not abstract theories, but raw reflections born of suffering, uncertainty, and the search for meaning under the gaze of powerful gods. They spoke of how to live well in a world where fate was merciless and fortune shifted like desert winds. One of the most striking texts is The Dialogue of Pessimism, a haunting conversation between a master and servant that explores the futility of action, the endless cycle of desire and disappointment. Another, The Babylonian Theodicy, is a poetic lament where a sufferer questions why the righteous must endure pain while the wicked thrive. These writings are deeply human, exposing the ache of injustice and the longing for order in a chaotic world. Yet Babylonian wisdom literature also offered guidance. Collections of proverbs urged honesty, patience, and humility, teaching that arrogance leads to downfall, that kindness strengthens bonds, and that wisdom lies in restraint. They revealed a culture that, despite its splendor and power, recognized the vulnerability of life and the need for virtue to withstand it. To read these texts is to hear the heartbeat of ancient humanity, to feel their fears, their doubts, their fragile hopes. Babylonian wisdom. Literature is the reminder that long before philosophy was written in Greek or Sanskrit, ordinary people wrestled with the same questions we ask today. Why do we suffer? What is justice? How do we live a life worth remembering? Epic of Gilgamesh philosophy. The philosophy of the Epic of Gilgamesh is carved into the oldest epic known to humanity, a tale that stares unflinchingly at mortality and asks what it means to live. Gilgamesh, the mighty king of Uruk, begins with arrogance and power, conquering and oppressing, believing himself beyond the reach of death. But when his beloved friend Enkidu dies, the illusion shatters, and Gilgamesh is consumed by grief. His heart rages against the truth that even kings must fall, and he sets out on a desperate quest for immortality. Through his journey across deserts, seas, and into the realm of the gods, he encounters wisdom greater than his strength. He learns that no human can escape death, that the search for eternal life is futile, and that the gods have woven mortality into the fabric of existence. Yet within this grim truth lies a revelation. While immortality of the body is impossible, immortality of the spirit is within reach. To build, to love, to create, to leave behind a legacy of meaning, these are the ways a mortal life echoes beyond the grave. The philosophy of the epic is not one of despair, but of awakening. It teaches that death gives life urgency, that grief opens the heart, and that the true measure of a person lies not in how long they live, but in how deeply they embrace the fleeting time they are given. The Epic of Gilgamesh whispers that we cannot outrun the grave, but we can choose to live with courage, love, and purpose, so that when the final shadow falls, something of us still burns bright in the memory of the world. Sumerian ethical teachings. Sumerian ethical teachings are among the oldest moral philosophies known to humanity, etched into clay tablets thousands of years ago, carrying the weight of a civilization that first learned to write its wisdom into the permanence of history. They remind us that even at the dawn of cities and kings, humanity wrestled with the same questions of justice, truth, and right living that haunt us today. These teachings urge respect for the gods, fairness in dealings, kindness to the vulnerable, and honesty in both word and deed. To the Sumerians, ethics was not abstract speculation, it was survival, for the balance of society depended on the integrity of its people. In their proverbs and laws, we hear the echo of a world discovering morality. Do not return evil to your adversary. Repay your evildoer with kindness. Such words reveal a startling sophistication, a recognition that vengeance corrodes while restraint preserves harmony. The instructions of Shurupak, one of the earliest wisdom texts, urge sons to respect their mothers, to avoid gossip, to act with moderation, and to protect the poor. These maxims were not cold rules, but heartfelt guidance, passed from parent to child as the foundation of human decency. The Sumerians believed the gods watched over justice, that lying, stealing, or exploiting others threatened not just individuals, but the divine order itself. Ethical living meant aligning with this sacred balance, ensuring that truth and fairness flowed through every transaction, every oath, every relationship. Sumerian ethical teachings stand as a testament that morality is as ancient as civilization itself. They reveal that from the very beginning, humanity has sought not only to build cities of stone, but to shape lives of virtue, bound together by fairness, honesty, and compassion. Hammurabi's Justice Code. Hammurabi's Justice Code stands as one of humanity's earliest monuments to the rule of law, carved into stone so its words would outlast kings and empires. In a world where might often determined right, Hammurabi, king of Babylon, declared that justice must flow not from whim, but from order, a written standard that bound ruler and subject alike. His code did not whisper, it thundered, inscribed on a black stele for all to see, its laws etched beneath the gaze of Shamash, the sun god of justice, as if to remind humanity that judgment was sacred, impartial, eternal. The code spoke in vivid clarity. If a man caused harm, he must bear its weight. If he broke faith, he must restore it. If he oppressed the weak, the law itself would rise against him. Its principles were not of mercy, but of balance, of retribution, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, so that society could be kept from the spiral of endless vengeance. Yet beneath its severity lay a vision of protection, especially for the widow, the orphan, and the poor, those most vulnerable to the cruelty of unchecked power. Hammurabi's justice code became more than law. It was a mirror of civilization itself. It declared that society is only as strong as its fairness, that peace requires accountability, and that the ruler's legitimacy rests not in conquest, but in his ability to uphold justice for all. It endures as both a warning and a beacon, that without justice power devours, but with it even kings must bow before a higher order carved in stone. Chaldean oracles. The Chaldean oracles are a mystical philosophy of fire and divinity, a fusion of Platonic thought and Near Eastern spirituality that emerged in the Roman Empire. They were revered as sacred revelations, offering a map of the cosmos, where every soul is caught between the pull of matter and the call of the divine. At their heart lies the vision of a universe alive with fire, the holy fire of the gods that illuminates, purifies, and binds all things together. This fire was not only physical but spiritual, the radiant essence that connected humanity to the divine source. The oracles teach that the soul has fallen into the world of matter, weighed down by the darkness of the body, but it carries within it a spark of celestial flame. Liberation comes through ascent, a turning inward to awaken the soul's inner light and rise back toward its origin. Ritual, prayer, and contemplation were seen as keys that unlocked the gates of higher realms, drawing the seeker upward through layers of existence until they reached union with the divine Father of light. The Chaldean oracles were not dry teachings, but living verses, recited as both philosophy and incantation, guiding initiates into mystical experience. They blended reason with revelation, insisting that human intellect alone cannot pierce the mysteries of being, but when joined with divine illumination, it becomes a ladder to transcendence. This philosophy is a cry of longing and a promise of ascent. The Chaldean oracles whisper that though the soul is trapped in shadow, it carries within it a flame that cannot die, and that through wisdom and devotion, it can rise once more into the eternal fire of the divine. Akkadian proverbs. Akkadian proverbs are among the earliest sparks of human wisdom, fragments of thought carved into clay tablets that carry the heartbeat of Mesopotamia across thousands of years. They are simple, sharp, and startlingly human, revealing that even in the world's first great cities, people wrestled with pride, greed, friendship, justice, and fate. These proverbs were not abstract theories, but living lessons, passed down to guide daily life, reminding farmers, merchants, rulers, and families of the fragile balance between fortune and folly. Some spoke of humility before the unpredictable world. Man is the shadow of a shadow. Others offered sharp warnings. He who has much silver may be happy. He who has much barley may be glad, but he who has nothing at all can sleep. In these words echoes a haunting recognition that wealth brings anxiety while simplicity carries peace. Many urged honesty, kindness, and respect, insisting that deceit corrodes and generosity endures. The beauty of Akkadian proverbs lies in their timelessness. They rise from a culture of temples and kings, yet their truths are as relevant to the modern soul as they were to the ancient scribe. They remind us that wisdom is not the property of philosophers alone, but of entire peoples who, through observation and hardship, distilled life into lines sharp enough to cut across centuries. Akkadian proverbs awaken a sense of kinship with the ancient world. They show that our ancestors laughed at folly, grieved over betrayal, sought fairness in a crooked world, and longed for peace in a life that often felt fragile. In their brevity, they carry the weight of eternity, whispering that though civilizations rise and fall, the human heart has always sought the same enduring truths. Phoenician religious philosophy. Phoenician religious philosophy is the vision of a people who lived between sea and sky, merchants and navigators whose gods reflected both the dangers they faced and the mysteries they revered. For the Phoenicians, divinity was not distant. It pulsed in the wind that carried their ships, in the storms that threatened them, in the fertility of the earth that sustained their cities. Their philosophy was interwoven with polytheism, where gods embodied cosmic forces, guiding human life through cycles of prosperity and peril. Chief among them was Baal, the storm god and bringer of rain, whose battles against chaos symbolized the eternal struggle to maintain order. The Phoenicians honored Astarte, goddess of fertility and love, embodying both creation and passion. They revered Melkart, lord of Tyre, whose myth of death and resurrection echoed the cycles of vegetation and the seasons. Their pantheon reflected a worldview that saw existence as fragile, sustained only by devotion, sacrifice, and the harmony between human beings and the divine. Rituals and offerings were not mere formalities, but acts of survival, transactions to maintain balance with powers that could either protect or destroy. At its heart, Phoenician philosophy taught that the divine and human realms were inseparable. Every voyage, every harvest, every treaty carried sacred weight, bound by oaths sworn before the gods. To break one was not just dishonor, it was sacrilege, inviting chaos upon the community. The Phoenicians, masters of trade and exploration, carried this spiritual worldview across the Mediterranean, spreading myths and rituals that influenced cultures far beyond their shores. Phoenician religious philosophy reveals a people who saw life as a negotiation with the sacred, a fragile covenant with forces greater than themselves, where survival, prosperity, and meaning all flowed from reverence for the divine order. Canaanite wisdom traditions. Canaanite wisdom traditions are fragments of a forgotten voice, echoes carried through myth, poetry, and ritual in the ancient Levant. They were born in a land where gods and humans intertwine, where storms, seas, and harvests were not just natural forces, but living presences demanding reverence and awe. At their heart lay the struggle to understand life's cycles, fertility and drought, war and peace, life and death, and to weave meaning through the stories of gods whose passions mirrored human struggles. Central to this tradition were the myths preserved in the city of Ugarit, where clay tablets revealed tales of Baal, the storm god, locked in cosmic battle with Yam, the chaotic sea, and Mot, the god of death. These stories were not entertainment, but lessons, teaching that existence itself is a fragile balance between order and chaos, growth and decay. Baal's victories brought rain and fertility to the land, while his defeats plunged the world into barrenness. Through these divine dramas, the Canaanites learned to see their own hardships as part of a vast cosmic rhythm, a reminder that no abundance is permanent, no struggle eternal. Wisdom also flowed through proverbs and practical sayings, guiding daily life with teachings on justice, humility, and reverence for the sacred order. These fragments reveal a people who saw morality not as rigid law, but as harmony with the divine forces that sustained existence. Though time has eroded their voices, Canaanite wisdom traditions whisper still that life is a cycle of rise and fall, that struggle is woven into the cosmos, and that wisdom lies in honoring the forces that shape the fragile thread of human survival. Hittite ethical teachings. Hittite ethical teachings are the echoes of an ancient Anatolian civilization that sought order not only through law, but through a moral vision of how humans should live together under the watch of their gods. The Hittites believed that justice was not just the concern of rulers, but a sacred duty that bound every person, from king to farmer, to the harmony of the cosmos. Their laws and instructions reveal a society deeply concerned with fairness, responsibility, and the weight of one's actions on both family and community. In Hittite wisdom texts, there are teachings on honesty, loyalty, humility, and respect for promises. To betray an oath was not just a social failure, but an offense against the divine order. Treaties and agreements were sealed with sacred rituals, and breaking them meant inviting the wrath of gods and the collapse of trust. The Hittite kings often reminded their heirs that power was fragile if it was not tempered with justice, urging them to rule with compassion and to care for the weak, the poor, and the vulnerable. Ethics also extended into daily life. Teachings emphasized kindness within households, respect for elders, and responsibility toward neighbors. To live rightly was to keep balance, to ensure that one's actions did not invite chaos into the community or disrupt the favor of the gods. Hittite ethical teachings remind us that even in the Bronze Age, people wrestled with the same questions we face today: how to be just, how to lead with integrity, how to honor trust, and how to live in a way that leaves the world more ordered than chaotic. It is a philosophy of responsibility, echoing across time with a call to live with conscience. Native American philosophy. Native American philosophy is the voice of the earth itself, a living wisdom rooted in the understanding that all things are connected: humans, animals, plants, rivers, winds, and stars, woven into one sacred web. It does not separate the spiritual from the natural, for the land is alive, the sky is alive, and every being carries a spirit deserving of respect. To walk in balance with this web is the essence of life, for harmony with nature is harmony with the self. It teaches that wisdom is not found in books, but in listening to the rhythm of the drum that echoes the heartbeat of the earth, to the silence of the forest, to the voices of ancestors who still walk in dreams and ceremonies. Stories, dances, and rituals carry truths that cannot be captured in mere words, reminding each generation that life is a circle, not a straight line. Birth, death, and renewal flow endlessly, like the seasons, each stage sacred, each connected to the whole. At the heart of this philosophy is reverence, gratitude for water, for food, for the hunt, for the sunrise. Nothing is taken without giving back. Nothing is owned in isolation, for the world is a shared gift. Community is sacred, and the individual exists not apart but as a thread in the larger tapestry of people and place. Native American philosophy stirs the soul because it awakens a forgotten truth. We are not masters of the earth, but children of it. To live by its wisdom is to walk gently, to honor all beings as kin, and to remember that every breath we take is part of a story much older and greater than ourselves. Aztec philosophy, or Toltecayotl. Aztec philosophy, known as Toltecayotl, is the wisdom of balance, a worldview that saw human life as a delicate path across a slippery earth where every step risked falling into chaos. To the Aztecs, existence was not random. It was infused with sacred meaning, guided by an ever-living cosmos where gods, nature, and humanity were bound together. At its heart was the search for a life of harmony, to live in Ixtli in Yolotl, with a face and a heart, meaning to cultivate authenticity, character, and moral clarity. The Aztecs believed the universe was sustained by struggle and sacrifice. The gods themselves had poured out their essence to set the sun in motion, and humanity, in turn, bore the responsibility of offering back to maintain cosmic balance. Sacrifice, often misunderstood as mere brutality, was in their philosophy an act of reciprocity, a way to keep the fragile cosmos alive. Yet daily life was not only about ritual, it was about living with moderation, discipline, and rootedness. To wander too far into excess, pride, or indulgence was to lose balance and fall from the sacred path. Wisdom teachers, the Talamati Naim, taught that truth was elusive, shimmering like jade or quetzal feathers, beautiful but never permanent. To seek wisdom was to learn how to walk upright on unstable ground, to live with dignity, gratitude, and humility, despite life's uncertainty. Aztec philosophy was not a denial of life's hardship, but an embrace of it, a recognition that fragility itself makes life sacred. Toltecayotl calls us to live awake, to shape ourselves like artists shaping stone, to walk carefully on the slippery earth, and to honor the great cosmic rhythm that sustains all things. Mayan philosophy. Mayan philosophy is carved into stone temples and woven into sacred calendars, a vision of life that saw humanity as part of a cosmic rhythm too vast to ignore. For the Maya, time itself was alive, a great wheel turning through cycles of creation and destruction, each moment carrying the weight of destiny. Existence was not linear, but cyclical, bound to the movements of stars and the breath of gods. To live well was to align oneself with these cosmic cycles, to act in harmony with forces that shape both heaven and earth. The Popol Vuh, the great book of Mayan wisdom, tells of gods who fashioned humanity from maize, the sacred corn, tying human life to the soil and the harvest. It is a philosophy of deep humility. Man is not master of the earth, but born of it, nourished by it, sustained only through reverence for it. Every ritual, every offering, every ceremony was an act of balance, ensuring that the gods who gave life would continue to bless the people with fertility, rain, and light. For the Maya, knowledge was sacred, found not only in myths, but in mathematics, astronomy, and art. They tracked the movements of Venus, charted the cycles of eclipses, and inscribed calendars that revealed the heartbeat of the cosmos. Wisdom meant recognizing the interweaving of science and spirit, calculation and reverence. Mayan philosophy burns with the truth that life is fragile, that the human story is part of a larger cosmic drama. It teaches that meaning is not found in conquest or accumulation, but in honoring the cycles of nature, in remembering that our flesh and spirit are bound to the eternal maze of creation. Inca philosophy, or Andean worldview. Inca philosophy, or the Andean worldview, is a vision of life woven from the mountains, rivers, and skies, a sacred understanding that the universe is alive and bound together through reciprocity and balance. For the Inca, existence was not divided between the spiritual and the material. Everything was infused with spirit, from the tallest peaks to the smallest grain of maize. The world itself was sacred, a vast web of relationships where humans, nature, and gods were partners in maintaining harmony. At the heart of this worldview was Aini, the principle of reciprocity. Nothing existed in isolation. Every gift demanded a return. Every act carried responsibility. To share harvest, to help a neighbor, to honor the earth was not charity, but survival, a recognition that balance sustains life. Even the gods, such as Inti the sun and Pachamama the earth, offered abundance to humanity, and in return demanded rituals, offerings, and gratitude. The Incas divided existence into three realms: Hanan Pacha, the upper world of the sacred and celestial; Ke Pacha, the middle world of human life; and Uku Pacha, the inner world of ancestors and the unseen. These realms were not separate but intertwined, reminding people that life is both visible and hidden, physical and spiritual, finite and eternal. Inca philosophy is a call to live with reverence for the natural order, to recognize that the mountains are guardians, the rivers are lifelines, and the earth is a mother. It teaches that harmony is achieved not through domination of nature, but through respect, gratitude, and balance, where humanity finds its true place as caretaker in a living cosmos. Navajo Hojo philosophy. Navajo Hojo philosophy is the sacred vision of living in beauty, harmony, and balance. It is not beauty as mere appearance, but beauty as a state of existence, where the body, mind, spirit, and world move together in rhythm. Hojo is health, peace, and balance. It is the deep recognition that the universe is ordered and alive, and that to walk in harmony with it is the highest way of being. To live in Hojo is to live with respect for all things, to see the sacred in every stone, every cloud, every breath of wind. The Navajo see life as a path, and the goal of that path is to walk in beauty. Illness, conflict, and suffering are signs of disharmony, of being pulled out of balance, and healing comes not only from medicine, but from restoring harmony through prayer, song, and ceremony. The chants of the night way and the mountain way are not just rituals, but acts of reweaving the soul into the cosmic fabric, drawing the individual back into alignment with the sacred order. Hojo is also a philosophy of responsibility. Every thought, word, and action carries weight, either strengthening harmony or unraveling it. To live with anger, greed, or disrespect is to create disharmony that echoes outward, but to live with kindness, patience, and gratitude is to strengthen the web of balance for all. The power of Hojo lies in its simplicity and depth. It teaches that every step can be a prayer, every choice a song, every breath a part of the eternal rhythm of the world. To embrace it is to walk gently, to see beauty everywhere, and to live as a living thread of harmony woven into the vastness of creation.